If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
C21 Lightsaber. Two halves. Peter stood before the figure of his father, Ego, feeling a whirlwind of emotions that he struggled to keep in check. The initial fear that gripped him swiftly morphed into a fiery anger, remembering the pain Ego had caused him through the death of his mother. However, as quickly as these feelings arose, they were replaced by skepticism. How could his father possibly find him here, in the depths of an ice cave on Ilum? It didn't take long for Peter to reach a conclusion: this was no real encounter with his father. It had to be a trial the cave was putting him through, a test of his emotional control and resilience, or some other nonsense. This realization cooled his anger and sharpened his focus. The Peter who might have once charged forward in blind rage was no more. His training under Ravager had honed his ability to master his emotions. At least to a certain degree. Nice try, but you're not real. So how about you *CK off? Peter said, his voice steady, a defiant glint in his eyes. I've got a kyber crystal to find and a lightsaber to make, so off you go. Bye-bye. Now he shooed his father away. Ego, or the illusion of him, didn't vanish at Peter's words. Instead, he walked closer, a smirk playing on his lips before he suddenly slapped Peter across the face. Does that feel real to you? Ego challenged, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Peter reeled from the unexpected physical contact, feeling the sting on his cheek. For a brief moment, his resolve wavered as he touched his face, his mind racing. But he quickly regathered his thoughts, sticking firmly to his belief. This had to be part of the trial. After all, Ego had no way of knowing Peter's whereabouts. Focusing on the task at hand, Peter considered his next move. If acknowledging the illusion for what it was hadn't dispelled it, perhaps there was another lesson to be learned here. Maybe the trial was about facing his fears? Deciding on a different approach, Peter squared his shoulders, meeting the gaze of the figure before him. All right, let's get this over with. What do you want from me? How do I pass? Were you born with a defect or something? His father asked, clearly goading him. I'm not some illusion, Peter. Ego's refusal to admit he was an illusion only stoked the fire within Peter. Yet, he knew well that this trial demanded a path without violence. This was a Jedi's trial, after all, not a Sith one. Peter racked his brain, conjuring every possible way to pass without resorting to conflict. He attempted dialogue, seeking to outwit the illusion with logic and reason. When words failed, he tried empathy, attempting to connect with the semblance of his father on a deeper level. Though he didn't try for long, feeling disgusted just talking to him for more than a minute. He then went on to try everything he could think of, hoping to get lucky and dispel the illusion before him. Yet, each attempt fizzled out, leaving Peter frustrated and back at square one. You all right, son? Ego asked, his gaze filled with concern and confusion, which only seemed to infuriate Peter. God, I hate you so much. Peter muttered, though he still kept his emotions under control. Suddenly, the air in the cave grew colder, or perhaps it was the chill of realization creeping up Peter's spine. There was one avenue he hadn't explored, one road he was loath to travel: forgiveness. It gnawed at him, the idea of forgiving Ego. But how could he forgive the man who had brought such immense pain and suffering into his life? No, he couldn't forgive him, better yet, he refused to do so. Although the Ego before him is no doubt an illusion, as he would have probably just kidnapped him by now if he wasn't, Peter still couldn't bring himself to forgive him. After all, forgiving the Ego before him would mean forgiving the real Ego, and that just wasn't possible. Besides, the trial will need me to actually mean what I say. Peter knew how these things worked by now. Confronting the illusion, Peter's voice echoed off the icy walls, you want forgiveness, right? That's the only thing I haven't tried. But you know what? I will never forgive you. You killed my mom, obliterated my chance to know any of my half-siblings, and to top it all off, you're a **ing psychopath piece of celestial trash. His words were a cascade of truth. As the last words left Peter's mouth, a sense of lightness enveloped him, an unexpected peace that felt almost tangible. Speaking the truth, acknowledging his pain and anger without succumbing to it, seemed to have lifted a burden Peter hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. For a moment, time stood still, and the weight of his confession hung heavily in the air. Peter half expected the illusion to retaliate, to mock him for his refusal or even outright attack him. But instead, the illusion of Ego faded, leaving Peter alone with his thoughts. Realizing that he failed the trial, Peter grappled with the reality that the Kyber crystal, the heart of a Jedi's lightsaber, would remain beyond his grasp. A pang of sadness hit him, mourning not just for the weapon he wouldn't wield but for the symbolic loss of a journey he thought he would to complete. But in the wake of his trial, a new understanding dawned on him. A lightsaber didn't define his strength or his worth. Life offered endless paths, and sadly, his did not hinge on wielding a laser sword. Nope, nuh-uh. Peter wasn't having it, his gaze moving, glaring at the cave around him. I'm not giving up that easy. I will have my laser sword. The cave's refusal to grant him a Kyber crystal had only fueled his resolve. If it wouldn't give him what he sought, then he'd take it by force. Surrounded by walls glittering with clear Kyber crystals, Peter felt a surge of excitement. These crystals were within arm's reach, and he was determined to claim one. With a steady hand, he reached out to a particularly luminous crystal, its glow captivating. The crystal seemed to pulsate with energy, as if aware of Peter's intentions. Grasping it firmly, he pulled with all his force-enhanced might. The cave seemed to resist, an almost magnetic force fighting to keep the crystal in place. But Peter, bolstered by his overwhelming power in the force, yanked it free with a triumphant cry. Ha! Yes! Holding the crystal in his hand, he felt a surge of accomplishment. It was heavier than he anticipated, pulsing with energy as if it had a life of its own. Peter's eyes glittered with the reflection of the crystal's light, contemplating seizing another as he practices Niemann, the two-sword style that Ravan was teaching him. However, the moment his hand brushed against another crystal, the cave trembled. A deep rumble echoed through the icy corridors, a clear sign of the cave's discontent with his theft. Peter paused, the vibration under his feet a stark warning he couldn't ignore. Then, as suddenly as the quaking started, it ceased, and in the unsettling quiet that followed, Ego appeared across from him once again. This time, the look on his face was far from the smirking visage Peter had faced earlier. Ego's expression was dark, his eyes bore into Peter's with an intensity and animosity that sent a shiver down his spine. Hey, Dad! Peter backed away, hiding the stolen crystal behind his back. I thought you left to pick up some cigarettes and milk. Without warning, Ego literally launched himself at Peter, flying through the air, his movement a blur of fury and power. Peter didn't have time to react, the Kyber crystal still clutched tightly in his hand. He tried to dive to the side, but he wasn't fast enough, his father appearing beside him, burying a powerful strike into his stomach. Eyes widening, Peter nearly folded in half as he spat out a mouthful of blood, barreling backwards and crashing into the cave wall behind him. Cough ugh! Can't we talk about this? Peter asked as he picked himself up, groaning in pain. But Ego was relentless, continuing his assault, each attack a testament to his otherworldly strength, forcing Peter to retreat. The illusion of his father may not have had all of his celestial powers, and certainly wasn't nearly as strong as the original, but it was certainly stronger than Peter. That much he could tell. Constant running for his life, Peter could feel the cold seeping into his bones, the chill of the cave a stark contrast to the heat of their battle. He countered when he could, his punches landing with less force than he would have liked, his moves more about buying time than causing damage. But Peter didn't stand a chance, his father's next blow sending him staggering back, his foot slipping on the icy ground. The momentary lapse gave Ego the advantage, closing the distance with a speed that defied the laws of physics. Peter's mind raced. Fighting was futile, evasion was the only path forward. If I can get out of this cave, then he shouldn't be able to follow me. I hope. With a burst of desperate energy, Peter turned on his heel and sprinted off. The cave's luminescent crystals blurred past him as he ran. Behind him, the sound of Ego's pursuit was a constant threat, each footstep a thunderous promise of the danger closing in on him. The cave twisted and turned, a labyrinth of ice and crystals, each corridor more confusing than the last. Peter's breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air biting at his lungs, his heart pounding in his chest. He ducked under a low-hanging icicle, nearly losing his footing as the ground beneath him sloped unexpectedly. The terrain was against him, the cave itself seeming to conspire with the illusion of his father to halt his escape. But it didn't stop there. Next, a sharp turn with the promise of escape led only to a cold, impassable dead end. Spinning on his heel, Peter chose another path, hope flaring briefly, only to be smothered by yet another dead end. The cave was a merciless adversary, manipulating its icy corridors to trap him at every turn, each dead end chipping away at his resolve, until he was left with no option but to confront his relentless pursuer. Peter's back pressed against the cold wall, a chilling reminder of the dire situation he found himself in. Ego closed the distance with slow, deliberate steps, his presence overwhelmingly intimidating. "You really thought you could escape me, Peter?" Ego's voice echoed, each word as sharp as the icicles hanging from the cave's ceiling. "What a disappointment you turned out to be." Peter, trying to mask his rising panic with bravado, retorted, "Yeah, well, the feeling's mutual. I mean, my real deadbeat dad could wipe the floor with you with his eyes closed and both hands tied behind his back." Cornered and with nowhere left to run, Peter steeled himself for a battle he knew he couldn't win. "I guess this is it." But just as Ego prepared to strike, suddenly, the kyber crystal in Peter's grasp pulsed with life. It glowed brightly, reacting to his determination to fight to the end and his fear of death. "What the?" Peter exclaimed as he felt the crystal binding with him, using his force energy as fuel. In a burst of energy, the crystal shined brightly, its light growing into an unstable sword of pure energy, its core as dark as the void of space, outlined by a brilliant white glow. "Insert picture of the dark saber here." Ego halted, his shock mirroring the cave's own surprise. The stolen kyber crystal, choosing Peter as its wielder, shifted the dynamics of their confrontation. Seeing this as an opportunity, Peter lunged forward, the energy sword cutting through the illusion of his father with precision. Ego's form was bisected from the hip to hip, but soon vanished before it could hit the ground, leaving Peter alone in the suddenly silent cave. The aftermath was a calm Peter hadn't anticipated. The cave seemed to relent, its icy walls no longer shifting to confine him. "Is that it? Are we good now?" Peter called out, receiving no reply. Seconds later, the energy sword in his hand faded from existence, leaving behind the crystal, now transformed. No longer clear, it pulsed with a dark core and a white halo, bringing a smile to Peter's face. "Haha! Laser sword here I come." Peter drawled out the last word as he collapsed, falling unconscious, the crystal still tightly grasped in his hand. C22 choosing a Jedi Master? When Peter's eyes fluttered open, the sterile white of the med bay greeted him, harsh and uncompromising. Through the narrow window, he glimpsed the streaks of starlight stretching into the blur of hyperspace, a sure sign they were en route back to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The realization that he wasn't trapped in the cave sparked a moment of relief, but that was quickly overtaken by a surge of panic. His hand was empty. A memory, vivid and undeniable, clawed its way into the forefront of his mind, his kyber crystal, its weight a comforting presence in his palm, even as he fell unconscious and collapsed within the cave. The thought of having left it behind sent a wave of dread crashing over him. He scrambled to search his surroundings beneath the sheets, through the folds and pockets of his clothes, across the sparse tabletops, desperation mounting with each passing second. Abruptly, the door to the med bay swung open, cutting through his frantic search. Yoda came walking inside, and in his hand gleamed Peter's kyber crystal, its black core and white halo unmistakable even from a distance. "Looking for this, were you?" Yoda's voice, as calm and steady as always, broke through the chaos of Peter's thoughts. Relief flooded Peter as he reached out to take the crystal, the connection between them reigniting the moment his fingers brushed against its surface. The anxiety that had gripped him eased, replaced by a sense of wonder and a bond that felt unbreakable. Yoda watched him for a moment, his eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and understanding. "Rare, it is, to find a crystal such as this," he finally spoke, breaking the silence. "The dark saber, its only known predecessor, you have heard of, HMM?" Peter nodded, which youngling hasn't heard about the dark saber? The dark saber, a legendary weapon whispered about in tales of Mandalorian warriors and Jedi alike, had been taught to him and every other youngling in their history class. The dark saber is an ancient and unique black-bladed lightsaber created by Tar Vizsla, the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order. The weapon was kept in the Jedi Temple after Vizsla's passing, but members of House Vizsla stole the saber in a conflict with the Jedi during the fall of the Old Republic. It's said that whoever wields dark saber can rule all of Mandalore. This crystal, like the dark saber, is unique. Imbued with a powerful connection to the Force, it is strong and resilient, the bond it forms with its wielder, Yoda continued, his gaze fixed on the crystal now cradled in Peter's hand. The significance of what he held dawned on Peter, a mix of pride and awe washing over him. Here, in his grasp, was not just a symbol of his trials and triumphs within the caves of Ilum, but one of the rarest kyber crystal types known to man. With the black and white crystal once again in his possession, Peter followed Yoda out of the med bay, a blend of relief and anticipation threading through his steps. Navigating through the ship, they entered a large cabin, alive with the hum of activity and the soft glow of various colored kyber crystals. Inside, fellow examinees, their faces set in determination, were huddled around workstations, guided by the steady hands of a master craftsman. This craftsman moved among the budding Jedi, offering insights into the delicate art of lightsaber construction. Amidst the buzz of excitement and creation, Peter's gaze drifted to a quieter corner of the room. There, under a shadow of disappointment, sat a small group with downcast eyes. These were the ones who had ventured into the caves yet emerged without a crystal, their hopes of becoming a Padawan dashed by the unforgiving trials. Peter's heart sank for them. After all, he was almost one of them. It was then that he caught sight of Ayla seated among the dejected group. Surprise etched itself across his face. Ayla had seemed certain to succeed. Confusion clouded his thoughts, but before Peter could voice his concern, Ayla noticed him. Her reaction was instantaneous. She leaped to her feet and closed the distance between them in a few swift strides. "Peter, you're all right." Ayla's voice was a mix of relief and worry as she bombarded him with questions about his well-being, her eyes scanning him for any sign of lingering harm. A smile broke across Peter's face, his worries momentarily forgotten. "I'm fine, Ayla. Just took a little nap, is all," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. Ayla's tense features softened, her relief palpable. She had been fraught with worry when he was carried unconscious out of the caves, the sight haunting her until now. Observing her subdued aura, Peter's smile faded, replaced by a frown of empathy. "Hey, it's okay. You can try for a crystal again next year," he offered, trying to find the words to comfort her. Ayla looked at him, a brow arched in confusion. "Why would I need to try again?" she asked, her tone laced with genuine puzzlement. Before Peter could respond, Ayla's hand moved to reveal a crystal, gleaming with a brilliant blue hue. "I didn't fail, Peter. I was waiting for you," she said, her smile radiating joy and pride. "I wanted us to build our lightsabers together." In that moment, Peter felt a wave of warmth rush through him. "Then, I guess we better get to work," he said, as they turned towards the workstations, their crystals in hand. Peter took his spot at an open workstation alongside Ayla, immediately getting to work. Despite not being the most technologically adept, Peter had learned much from Ayla over the past 3 years. His confidence, although not the best when it comes to these sorts of things, felt unwavering today. Laying out the lightsaber components before him, Peter felt a thrill of anticipation. Each piece, from the smallest power connector to the curved hilt he envisioned, held the promise of a masterpiece forged by his own hands. The master craftsman, noticing Peter's meticulous preparation, offered guidance, explaining the purpose and assembly of each component with patient clarity. As Peter pieced together his lightsaber, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had chosen a curved hilt design, the curve allowing him to slash and lunge at his opponents with greater precision. This wasn't just any lightsaber, it would be an extension of himself, a partner in the battles to come. However, the moment he laid his black and white kyber crystal on the table, a hush fell over the room. Ayla's eyes widened in astonishment, mirroring the shock that rippled through the nearby examinees. Whispers spread like wildfire, the name Darksaber murmured with a blend of reverence and disbelief. Ayla, recovering from her initial surprise, leaned closer to Peter. "That crystal, it's incredible," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and curiosity. "I've never seen anything like it." Peter, feeling a surge of pride, simply nodded. "Yeah, it's something special," he admitted, his focus returning to the task at hand. He refused to let the murmurs distract him. With a steady hand, he began the intricate process of integrating the crystal into the lightsaber's heart. The matte black design he envisioned took shape, sleek and imposing, the curved hilt fitting perfectly in his grip. It was more than he had hoped for, a weapon that was not only cool-looking but exceptionally effective in combat. Insert picture of Count Dooku's lightsaber here, A/N, but matte black. As the final piece clicked into place, Peter activated his lightsaber for the first time. The room fell into a deeper silence as the blade ignited, casting a black and white glow that illuminated his proud smile. The power and connection he felt were immediate, the lightsaber humming with a life of its own. Ayla, standing by his side, smiled widely. "Peter, it's amazing," she said, her admiration clear. The room erupted into hushed murmurs, the mix of awe, shock, excitement, jealousy was palpable. Even the craftsman was stunned into silence, his mouth hanging open. As Peter stood admiring his newly forged dark saber, a voice beside him announced a completion of another kind. Ayla radiated with satisfaction and triumph. She had spent considerable time tweaking and perfecting every detail of her lightsaber, her dedication evident in the gleaming blue blade that now hissed into existence. "Congratulations, Ayla, it's beautiful," Peter said, his voice warm as he turned to admire her handiwork. The blue light reflected in his eyes, casting them in a surreal glow, mirroring the sense of camaraderie that filled the air. As time marched on, one by one, students completed their sabers, their faces alight with the joy of their achievement. The cabin, once filled with the tension of creation, now hummed with excited chatter and the shared experience of success. The journey back to Coruscant was a flurry of curiosity and admiration. Peter found himself the center of attention, his fellow examinees bombarding him with questions about his unique dark saber crystal. Their intrigue was palpable, their eyes hungry for the story behind the enigmatic weapon in his grasp. Yet, Peter kept what truly happened to himself. With a shrug and a wry smile, he brushed off their questions, saying only that he found the crystal as anyone would find theirs. Upon their arrival on Coruscant, the city planet greeted them with its familiar blend of chaos and order, a welcome backdrop to their return. The towering spires of the Jedi Temple stood as a beacon, calling them home. Peter, eager to test out his new dark saber, made his way towards the training grounds, his steps light with anticipation. "Peter," came a voice, calm and resonant, grasping his attention. Yoda stood there, motioning for him to come along. "Follow me, you must." Guided by Yoda, Peter found himself before the Jedi Council, the weight of the moment settling upon his shoulders. What's this about, if you don't mind me asking?" he asked, wondering if he was in trouble for something. Mace Windu's voice broke the silence, authoritative yet laced with genuine curiosity. "Peter Quill, you stand before us having demonstrated exceptional skill and ability. Your victory in the dueling competition has granted you a rare privilege among Jedi, the right to choose your own master. Whom do you choose?" The room fell into an even deeper silence, the weight of his decision palpable in the air. Every member of the council, their faces filled with expectation, awaited the chosen one's answer. Peter's gaze shifted between Yoda and Windu, two figures who he has come trust and respect. They both knew of his secret, the Walkman, yet they had kept it to themselves, safeguarding one of his most prized possession. The weight of decision hung heavy in the air, every eye in the room fixed upon him, awaiting his choice. Peter opened his mouth, his decision clear in his heart: "I choose." The room held its breath, the anticipation rising as each council member hoped they'd be chosen. After all, who wouldn't want the honor to be the chosen one's master? Finally, Peter came to a decision: "I choose, Master Windu." C23 Fall of the Rule of Two. In an extravagant mansion in a wealthy district of Naboo's capital city, Theed, Darth Sidious, known in the public eye as Sheev Palpatine, the newly elected senator for Naboo, toasted to his and his master's success, his eyes gleaming with malevolent triumph. Beside him, his master, Darth Plagueis, a being of unmatched power and dark wisdom, raised his glass, mirroring his apprentice's enthusiasm perfectly. The air was thick with anticipation and the aura of victory, for the political ascent of Palpatine marked a significant stride in Plagueis's elaborate scheme to overthrow the Galactic Republic. However, beneath the facade of celebration, a more sinister plot brewed in the depths of Sidious's ambition. Sidious, under the guise of celebration, had been meticulously refilling his master's cup, encouraging him to indulge further into intoxication. "Let me refill that for you." He spoke humbly, maliciousness hidden in his actions. The drink, however, was laced with a potent concoction, a final, deadly ingredient to ensure the success of Sidious's treacherous intent. As the night waned, Sidious watched with a predator's patience, waiting for the alcohol and poison to take effect, unaware that his master harbored suspicions and paranoia that ran years deep. Plagueis had played the part of the unsuspecting victim like an A-class actor. The alcohol, he knew, was a ruse, the true poison lay in the ambition of his apprentice. With a subtle bit of bodily manipulation through the Force, which only a being of his caliber could manage, Plagueis filtered out the poison and alcohol as he drank, rendering Sidious's plan futile. Seeing his master dozing off in his chair, Sidious seized the moment, his lightsaber humming to life, casting the room in a sinister red glow. He lunged towards his master, certain of his victory. But sadly, for him, the moment was short-lived. Plagueis, sober and powerful, ceased his acting, and with a swift motion, unleashed a torrent of Sith lightning upon his apprentice. Sidious, caught off guard, was flung across the room, screaming in agony as the electric fury of the dark side enveloped him. Arg! Plague Ace, with a cold laugh, pursued Sidious, letting the lightning dance around him a moment longer, savoring the taste of betrayal turned upon itself. When the screams had subsided into desperate gasps, Plague Ace ceased his assault, looking down at Sidious with an expression that was both a mockery and a reprimand. "Did you think me blind, deaf, or perhaps dumb?" Plague Ace's voice was a mix of amusement and disdain. "To not see this little betrayal of yours coming from miles away, even as you dared to take a Night Brother of Dathomir as your apprentice." The revelation struck Sidious like a physical blow. His betrayal, intended to secure his ascension, had been anticipated from the start, his every move surveyed by his master. Plague Ace, with a derisive laugh, continued, "Mother Talzin and I have known each other for decades. Did you truly believe she wouldn't inform me? Especially after you kidnapped her son." He stares down at his apprentice, disappointment and contempt painting his features. "Even the Jedi have been snooping around, asking questions about you. Who knows what stupidity you must have attempted to draw their attention. The Jedi have been investigating me." Sidious barely computed his master's words, his form shrouded in pain and humiliation. Logging that new bit of information away for later, Sidious rose to his feet, rage filling his veins, a dark, poisonous fury that had been festering for years, now unleashed in a moment of reckoning. His failure, a bitter taste he couldn't swallow, propelled him forward, his lightsaber flying back to his hand. With a casual flick of his wrist, Plague Ace's own lightsaber dropped into his hand and ignited, its blade a deep crimson. The air crackled with raw power as the two Sith Lords faced each other, the tension rising. Sidious charged, his movements a blur, fueled by a maelstrom of rage and resentment. Each swing of his saber was aimed with lethal intent, designed to cut down the master who had outplayed him. But Plague Ace was no mere opponent, he was a force of nature, his defense as impenetrable as steel. With a grace that contradicted his tall stature, he parried each strike, his every counter a dance of death, precise and calculated. The clash of their sabers lit the room in flashes of red, casting long shadows that danced along the walls like specters. As the duel dragged on, Sidious's attacks grew more frenzied, a desperate barrage seeking any weakness, any chink in his master's armor. Yet, for every move Sidious made, Plague Ace had an answer, his strikes not just defensive but punishing. Though it wasn't just a battle of blades but of wills, as both Sith Lords tapped into the dark side, hurling force pushes and pulls in an attempt to unsettle the other. Sidious, in a moment of raw power, unleashed a torrent of Sith lightning, arcs of electricity aiming straight for his master. But Plague Ace simply held his hand out, absorbing the attack, channeling it back towards Sidious with a single gesture, amplified by the fury of the dark side. Ugh! Sidious, unable to absorb the lightning like his master, was forced to use his lightsaber to block, the lightning drawn to the energy blade and away from himself. The room trembled under the weight of their power, objects levitating and shattering as the battle raged on. Sidious, sensing a momentary lapse in his master's concentration, aimed a low sweep of his sword, hoping to amputate Plague Ace's legs. But the move was anticipated, sidestepped with a fluidity that spoke of centuries of training. Plague Ace's counter was swift, a heavy telekinetic blow aimed at Sidious's midsection, sending him reeling back. Gasping for air, Sidious barely caught himself before crashing into the wall. His eyes, burning with hate, met Plague Ace's unyielding gaze. There was no fear, no hesitation, only the cold, hard truth of the gap in power between them. In the brief standstill that followed their furious exchange, Plague Ace's face split into a sinister smirk, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "You know, my foolish apprentice," Plague Ace began, his voice dripping with mockery, "I decided to follow in your ambitious footsteps. I, too, have taken a new apprentice. You might be familiar with him as well." Sidious, panting from exertion, narrowed his eyes in suspicion and rising dread. The mention of a new apprentice sparked a flicker of realization, mingling with the shock that coursed through him. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the shadowy doorway, the hum of a lightsaber igniting to reveal a blade as red as blood, its glow casting an eerie light on the newcomer's features. The eyes that met Sidious's were unmistakable in their yellow gleam, a hallmark of deep immersion in the dark side. "Count Dooku," Plague Ace announced, his voice laced with triumph. The figure stepped forward, revealing himself fully. Count Dooku, a man of noble bearing even now twisted by the dark side's embrace, stood beside Plague Ace, his lightsaber at the ready. "Hello, old friend. Dooku greeted Sidious with a smile that didn't seem to reach his eyes. Insert picture of Count Dooku here. Dooku, a former Jedi Master, trained by Yoda himself. After leaving the Jedi Order, due to his growing disillusionment with the corruption and perceived flaws within the Galactic Republic, he now serves as Count of Sereno, his home planet, which is where Plagueis found him. Sidious's shock gave way to a surge of betrayal and anger. Dooku was supposed to be his pawn, a piece he was slowly working to bring under his control. Yet, here he stood as Plagueis's apprentice, a clear sign that Sidious's master had outmaneuvered him once again. Realizing the odds were now heavily stacked against him, Sidious's survival instincts took over. With a hiss of rage, he turned on his heel, attempting to flee the room. But as he moved, Plagueis and Dooku were already upon him. In a blur of motion, they cornered him as Plagueis struck, his lightsaber arcing toward Sidious with lethal precision. Sidious, caught in his flight, felt the searing pain as the blade grazed across his chest, carving a cauterizing wound from shoulder to waist. Sidious shrieked in agony. The pain was intense, but it fueled his power through the dark side, lending him the strength to leap through a nearby window, shattering the glass and tumbling into the night beyond. Landing with a roll, Sidious quickly gathered himself and sprinted off, his hand clutched over the wound that marred his flesh. The burn of the cut was a stark reminder of his failure. Behind him, on the mansion's balcony, Dooku was about to leap off and pursue, but Plagueis called him off. "Don't bother. You won't catch him. If there's one thing that boy knows how to do, it's to run and hide like the rat he is. Just let him go." Minutes later, the mansion began to glow with the light of a growing fire. Plagueis, knowing that his former apprentice could out him at any time, was erasing all evidence of their presence, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. As they stepped out of the burning mansion, Plagueis turned to Dooku, a dark resolve etched into his features. "It is time we leave, my apprentice. The Jedi and the Senate must remain ignorant of our existence. The plan must evolve, and Sidious, let him hide. His fear will serve as a reminder of the true power of the dark side." With that, the Sith Lord and his new apprentice vanished into the night, leaving the burning mansion behind them. Groaning in pain, his chest a tight knot of agony, Darth Sidious staggered onto the sleek ramp of his private ship, hidden away in the less frequented landing pads of Theed. As he entered the dimly lit interior, a figure stepped out of the shadows to greet him. Darth Maul, his young apprentice, a red zabrak with black tattoo-like markings all over his body. Horns adorned his head, adding to his intimidating, demonic visage. His eyes, burning with loyalty, immediately narrowed in concern at the sight of his master's injury. Insert picture of Darth Maul here. "What happened, Master?" Maul's voice, usually steady and filled with conviction, held a note of unease. Sidious, his patience frayed to its limits, lashed out. Lightning crackled from his fingertips, striking Maul with vicious intensity. "Arg!" His apprentice's screams filled the ship, a twisted symphony to Sidious's ears, briefly alleviating the crushing weight of his failure. As the lightning subsided, Maul collapsed, unconscious but alive. Sidious, his breaths heavy and uneven, felt a momentary release from his torment. With a flick of his wrist, the ship's engines roared to life, the vessel lifting off, leaving Naboo and its political entanglements behind. Sidious, now alone with his thoughts and the unconscious form of his apprentice, considered his next moves. The Republic, with its vastness and power, had been his playing field up until now, but with Plagueis's influence likely to unmask him, as well as the Jedi's recent investigation into his background, it had become a cage. He just became a senator, which was one step away from Supreme Chancellor, which in turn was one step away from Emperor, but now he was forced to throw it all away. As the ship set its course for the Outer Rim, far away from any Republic control, Sidious pondered the possibilities. The Kree and Nova empires, both nations embroiled in war, presented a new arena for him to dominate. War, after all, was a breeding ground for the dark side, a chaos in which a Sith Lord could thrive, manipulate and rise to power. Sidious allowed himself a thin, cruel smile. The Republic was but one stage, the galaxy was rife with opportunities for those willing to seize them. Unbeknownst to both Sidious and Plagueis, their clash and subsequent separation marked a turning point in Sith history. The Rule of Two, a doctrine established by Darth Bane millennia ago to preserve the Sith lineage through secrecy and cunning, was forever broken. This rule mandated that only two Sith could exist at any given time, a master to embody power, and an apprentice to covet it, ensuring that only the strongest would survive and rule. With Sidious and Plagueis now operating independently, with their own apprentices, the strict adherence to the rule of two was effectively shattered. This divergence from centuries of tradition could potentially lead to a resurgence of the Sith in numbers, strength, and visibility, challenging the Jedi and the Republic like never before. Yet, it also sowed the seeds for internal strife, as multiple Sith, unbound by the rule of two, could vie for dominance in a galaxy ripe for the taking. The ramifications were endless. C242 Masters. As Peter announced his choice, the room fell into a rare silence. The council members, seated in a semicircle, exhibited mixed reactions. Some nodded in approval at his decision, while others did their best to mask their feelings of jealousy or disappointment. Mace Windu, leaning forward with an expression of composed curiosity, was the first to break the silence. "Why have you chosen me, Peter?" he inquired. Peter, standing firm yet respectful before the council, explained, "Well, you saved me and brought me here to the Jedi Order. You rescued me from a prison cell, where I would have most definitely starved to death. I owe you my life and..." Before Peter could continue, Windu interjected, "While I am honored, Peter, you shouldn't choose a master solely because they saved you. Your choice should reflect who you believe is the best match for you as a master." Around the room, many of the masters, especially those who harbored hopes of being Peter's choice, nodded in agreement. Peter nodded, absorbing Windu's words with the seriousness they deserved. "That's exactly why I chose you," he said, his voice steady. "The truth is, the choice was between you and Master Yoda. However, since Master Yoda is practically a master to me already, as the teacher of the Bear Clan which I belong to, I thought it best to choose another master. This way, I feel like I'm getting the best of both worlds. Two masters, in a sense." Some council members started to voice their concerns, arguing that a Padawan could only have one master. However, before the debate could escalate, Yoda's voice, calm and steady, cut through the tension. "Truly see me as your master, do you?" he asked, looking directly at Peter. Peter nodded earnestly. "It was a hard choice," he admitted. "I almost chose you, Master Yoda. But I thought, why limit myself to learning from one teacher when I can have two?" A small laugh escaped Yoda, soon shared by Windu and a couple of other masters. The room's atmosphere lightened for a moment, the shared humor bridging the gap between tradition and Peter's unconventional perspective. However, as the laughter faded, some of the more conservative Jedi on the council began to voice their complaints once more. The debate seemed to revolve around the traditions of the Jedi Order. Sensing the mounting tension, Yoda sighed deeply and addressed Peter, "Wait outside, you must, while we discuss." Peter nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He gave a quick, respectful bow before exiting the council chamber, leaving the members to deliberate on his unconventional request. As the door closed behind him, Peter let out a sigh as he found himself alone in the corridor, awaiting an answer. "I hope my little speech swayed them," he thought, knowing it would enhance his training by a large margin if he had two of the strongest Jedi as his masters. Soon enough, the heavy door of the council chamber swung open once more, beckoning Peter back into the room filled with some of the galaxy's most powerful Jedi. As he stepped inside, he couldn't help but notice a few scowls etched on the faces of the more conservative members of the council. A good sign, perhaps, he thought hopefully. Yoda, seated at the heart of the semicircle, fixed Peter with a discerning gaze. "Come to a decision, we have," he began, and Peter's heart sank as Yoda continued, "Agreed we have that two masters, you cannot have." The frown on Peter's face was almost instantaneous, a mirror to the disappointment budding in his heart. But before the cloud of gloom could settle over him, Windu's voice cut through the tension. "However," he said, a small smile forming on his lips, "it is within my right as your master to allow another to train you alongside me or in my stead whenever I see fit. And I see no issue in having Grand Master Yoda assist in your training." A smile quickly replaced the frown on Peter's face, realizing that this was a loophole in the strict traditions of the Jedi Order, and it seemed Yoda and Windu were more than happy to exploit it for his benefit. While he might not be able to call Yoda his master officially, the venerable Jedi could still act as one with Windu's blessing, which he seemed willing to give. Instantly, understanding dawned on Peter as to why those conservative members had been scowling upon his re-entry. They were technically right, he wasn't allowed to have two masters at once, yet they had been outmaneuvered by a simple loophole. As the meeting came to an end, Windu gestured for Peter to follow him. They left for a secluded training ground. They hadn't spoken too often since Yondu had rescued Peter 3 years ago, and the weight of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Under the shade of an old, spiral-branched tree, Yondu finally spoke. As a Padawan, your duties as a Jedi have finally begun. This period is about more than just honing your skills with the Force and a lightsaber. It's about understanding the deeper responsibility that each Jedi holds. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. You'll be allowed to leave the temple with me for missions or other purposes. These experiences are vital, offering lessons that the confines of the temple cannot. He said, staring Peter in the eyes. To be clear, you are not a youngling anymore, so I will not treat you as one. I expect a level of maturity and awareness from my Padawan, understood? Yes, you have nothing to worry about from me. Peter nodded his head. And, Yondu continued, a slight smile touching his lips, when you're deemed ready, you may also undertake missions on your own. This autonomy is a very rare privilege granted to those who show exceptional maturity and skill. Peter nodded, absorbing every word, liking the idea of being able to go out and explore on his own. Maybe I can go looking for one of the Infinity Stones someday, if they even exist in this universe. Yondu's tone softened a bit as he added, now that you're a Padawan, you'll also have access to a broader range of the Jedi archives as well. I urge you to make use of this privilege. The archives hold knowledge accumulated over thousands of years' wisdom on the Force, history, diplomacy, and more. Studying hard will not only make you stronger in the Force but also assist you in your duties as a Jedi. Peter felt a surge of excitement. The archives were a treasure trove he had only begun to explore, as his former status as a youngling locked him out of 99% of the information. I can finally start preparing for the future. He thought, recalling his goals. Peter's goals. Train and learn everything I can before leaving the Jedi Order. Become self-sufficient. Kill my father. Find love and get married. The opportunity to delve deeper into the archives was invaluable, as it would help him complete his first 2 goals. And lastly, to become a Jedi Knight, Yondu concluded, his gaze turning very serious, you must demonstrate your mastery in lightsaber combat and various Force techniques, but more importantly, you must embody the principles of the Jedi Code. Once you've shown me this, I can recommend you to the Council, who would then decide if you are ready or not. Peter understood. So I have to convince them that I'm the perfect Jedi, hey? That shouldn't be too hard. With that out of the way, Yondu turned to Peter, his serious expression loosening slightly. Now, I'd like to get a grasp of your skills, Peter. Show me what you can do. With confidence, Peter demonstrated his proficiency with the Force telekinesis, Force light, and other abilities. Of course, he didn't show any of the Sith abilities that Ravager had taught him, as that would most likely get him killed, or at the very least locked away. Peter also discussed his academic prowess, noting his high performance before graduating. Yondu listened, his expression one of quiet approval. When Peter concluded, he drew his all-black lightsaber, igniting it with a flick of his wrist. The black energy blade was a stark contrast against the backdrop of the calm training ground. Yondu's eyebrow arched at the sight of the unusual weapon. That's quite the lightsaber, he remarked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Thanks, I had to go through a lot to get it. Peter said, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Now, why don't we spar? After all, it'd be better to show you my dueling skills rather than just tell you. We don't have to fight. Yondu shook his head, acknowledging Peter's eagerness. I'm well aware of your prowess with a lightsaber, Peter. It would be hard not to hear about the genius youngling who could outmatch Padawans and even some knights in a spar. Still, Peter was insistent, hungry for the chance to test his skills, especially with his new lightsaber. I need to test this out anyway, he said, almost pleading. With a resigned sigh and an amused smile, Yondu relented. Drawing his own lightsaber, he ignited the purple blade, and nodded at Peter, a silent signal for him to make the first move. With determination and excitement etched across his face, Peter lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air towards Yondu. The Jedi Master deftly parried the attack, his movements fluid and precise. The duel escalated quickly, with Peter unleashing a series of aggressive attacks, each one met with Yondu's unshakable defense. Yondu, in turn, countered with powerful, deliberate strikes, forcing Peter to draw upon every bit of his agility and training to dodge and parry. As they moved, their lightsabers clashed in a blur of light and shadow, the sound of energy against energy echoing around them. Peter was pushed to his limits, and forced to use maneuvers that only Yoda could bring out of him. I didn't know you were this good with a sword. He commented as he ducked under Yondu's blade, wondering who would win in a duel, Yoda or Yondu. I am among the best in the order. Yondu replies with the tiniest hint of pride in his voice. And Peter didn't doubt him, as he was relentless, a formidable opponent whose understanding of lightsaber combat was unparalleled. Yet, despite the intensity of his attacks, there was control and precision to his movements. Constantly enhancing himself through the Force, Peter felt his muscles strain and his breath quicken as the duel continued, each exchange more intense than the last. As the duel reached its climax, Peter saw an opening and seized it, channeling all his energy into a final, powerful strike. Yondu, anticipating the move, stepped aside at the last moment, allowing Peter's momentum to carry him forward. With a swift, gentle motion, Yondu tapped his offhand against Peter's back. I think that's enough, Yondu announced. The duel ended as quickly as it had begun, with Peter panting heavily, facing away from Yondu, his lightsaber still in hand. He deactivated it and turned to face the Jedi Master, a mix of fatigue and respect in his eyes. Yondu smiled, deactivating his lightsaber. Impressive, Peter. You've pushed yourself far beyond what many Padawans are capable of. Your skill with a lightsaber is truly commendable, but remember, the essence of being a Jedi lies not only in combat. Peter nodded, having heard that a dozen times already. He agreed that life wasn't all about fighting, but he also enjoyed dueling with a lightsaber more than he probably should. Yondu placed a hand on Peter's shoulder, his expression one of approval. You have great potential, Peter. Now go and get some rest. I'm sure you're tired after traveling to and from Ilum, he said, shooing him away. We'll meet again tomorrow to officially start your training. C25 Ninova War. And escape. Months had passed since Peter had been officially designated as a Padawan, and his training under the tutelage of not one, but 3 masters had pushed him to limits he hadn't known existed. His days were a relentless series of lessons, practice, and challenges that tested every fiber of his being. Yet, Peter thrived under the pressure, his determination fueled by a deep-seated desire to master the ways of the Force, not to mention the sword as well. By day, the Jedi Temple's ancient halls echoed with the sounds of Peter's rigorous training sessions. Yondu and Yoda, 2 of the Jedi Order's most formidable masters, guided him through the complexities of combat and the subtleties of the Force. Yondu, with his unparalleled expertise in lightsaber dueling, drilled Peter in the disciplines of Shiicho and Nieman, refining his technique until it was sharp and fluid. The rigorous sparring sessions against his masters, who wielded their lightsabers with an awe-inspiring mix of precision and power, were both daunting and exhilarating. Master Yoda, on the other hand, took the lead in deepening Peter's connection to the Force. The old Jedi's wisdom was boundless, and under his guidance, Peter began to explore the vast potential of his Force abilities. Yoda introduced him to the intricacies of sensing abilities, teaching him to attune his senses to the world around him through the Force. He explained the concept in simple terms, likening it to expanding one's awareness to become one with the environment, feeling the presence of life, the ebb and flow of the Force, and even glimpsing the echoes of the past, if he was skilled and strong enough, of course. Yoda's lessons allowed Peter to detect life in his surroundings and sense the Force in others, both of which would come in handy in the future. But sadly, he still couldn't get any glimpses of the echoes of the past, an ability that Yoda cautioned required great care and focus. And though Peter really wanted to learn projected telepathy, the ability to communicate with others at long distances and relay words without speaking, as well as the Jedi mind trick, which is basically a low-level mind control, both Yoda and Yondu insisted that he wasn't ready yet, which was annoying to hear. However, it was during the secrecy of night that Peter sought the teachings of his third master, Darth Revan. Hidden away from the watchful eyes of the Jedi, Revan embraced the aspects of the Force that the Jedi Order shied away from. It was from him that Peter learned the subtleties of influence, the Jedi mind trick that Yondu and Yoda had deemed him too young to wield. Revan, with his unique perspective as both a former Jedi and a Sith, saw no harm in arming Peter with the knowledge, or maybe he did see harm, but he simply didn't care. Revan was particularly fascinated by Peter's black lightsaber. So fascinated, in fact, that he stole it from his apprentice for an entire night just so he could meditate with the crystal, revealing its deep connection to Peter, a bond that intrigued Revan greatly. Under Revan's tutelage, Peter also mastered Force Crush, which wasn't very hard as he seemed to have a natural affinity for telekinesis. This new skill, which allowed him to literally crush his enemies from a distance, along with his proficiency in various other telekinetic abilities, marked him as a formidable Force user. Peter's training in swordplay continued under Ravan's watchful eye as well, complementing the lessons he received during the day. The combination of Jedi discipline and Sith pragmatism honed Peter's skills to a fine edge, making him a versatile and unpredictable opponent. The balance between light and dark, day and night, Jedi wisdom and Sith teachings shaped Peter into a uniquely skilled Padawan. During the downtime of his training, Peter surrounded himself with a sea of data pads. He sat engrossed in his studies, far removed from the physical rigors of his daytime training. His focus now lay on the practical skills needed for life beyond the temple's walls. The desire for self-sufficiency drove him to delve deep into the archives, seeking knowledge on starship piloting, maintenance, the galactic economy, and so much more. But that wasn't all that he used the archives for, as a personal quest tugged at his heartstrings: the search for Earth, his home planet. It was a task he undertook in stolen moments, often late at night when the rest of the Jedi Temple was shrouded in silence. But despite gaining access to the vast expanse of knowledge housed within the Jedi archives, Peter's search for Earth, or as he also knew it from the MCU, C-53, proved fruitless. The archives, comprehensive as they were, cataloging over 1.3 million major inhabited planets and countless more minor ones, offered no clue to the location or even the existence of Earth. "It doesn't make any sense," Peter muttered to himself as he navigated through the holographic star maps and databases. "How can an entire planet just not exist in any records?" The realization dawned on him that Earth's absence from the archives wasn't an oversight, it was indicative of Earth's isolation from the galactic community. His home had never made contact with alien civilizations, at least not in a manner significant enough to warrant inclusion into the Republic or any other nation. The only noteworthy event, the invasion of New York led by Loki, was still years away by his calculations. Peter considered the structure of the galaxy as he knew it: core worlds, colonies, inner rim, expansion region, mid-rim, and the outer rim. None of these vast regions held any mention of Earth. The logical conclusion was daunting: Earth had to be located in the unknown regions, or, perhaps even more troubling, wild space. The unknown regions, mapped yet unexplored territories rife with dangers like hyperspace anomalies and black holes, were daunting enough. But wild space, the uncharted expanse that wrapped the galaxy, was an even more intimidating prospect. It was in wild space that one might encounter the most perilous threats, far from the Republic or any other nation's reach. Peter's thoughts drifted to the Marvel villains that might lurk in such uncharted territories. The Clintar race, or perhaps the mad titan Thanos himself, were beings of immense power and malice. The prospect of them existing in wild space was a chilling thought, suggesting that Earth, if located there, was dangerously close to such malevolent forces as well. And what about Asgard? Peter pondered aloud, recalling the majestic realm that was supposedly home to Thor and other Norse gods. Didn't the Earth technically fall under their territory as well? He recalled, though he wasn't sure. Despite his newfound access to the Jedi archives, there was no mention of Asgard or its inhabitants. This absence supported his theory: Asgard, like Earth, must be situated in wild space, distant and detached from the galaxy's more civilized sectors. As he shut down the archive terminals and prepared to leave, a determination settled over him. "One day, I'll find you, Earth," he whispered into the quiet of the archives. "And I'll come home just to eat a huge pizza." Peter's footsteps echoed softly against the polished stone floors of the Jedi Temple as he made his way back to his quarters, his mind swirling with thoughts of his time in the archives. And just as he reached the door to his room, intent on catching a few hours of sleep before his nightly rendezvous with Ravan, the data pad buzzed with an incoming message. Blinking away the residual images of star maps, schematics, and walls of text, Peter glanced at the screen to find a message from Mace Windu, summoning him to the council chamber immediately. A surge of curiosity coursed through him. What could be so important that it couldn't wait until morning? Upon entering the council room, Peter was met by the imposing figures of Windu and Yoda, both of whom regarded him with expressions that were inscrutable yet somehow reassuring. "You wanted to see me, Masters?" Peter asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, Peter," Windu replied, his tone serious. "The Senate has tasked us with a mission of great importance, and you are to accompany me." Peter's heart skipped a beat. His first mission. The opportunity to leave the temple and put his training into action was something he had been eagerly anticipating. A mission? What kind of mission? He asked, his eagerness barely contained. Yoda leaned on his cane, his eyes twinkling in the dim light. "Ambassadors, you and Master Windu will be, to the Kree and Nova empires, End to conflict, the Republic has ordered peace, you must help negotiate. Peter absorbed the information, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling within him. The Kree/Nova War was a conflict he had read about, and even slightly recalled from his MCU knowledge. Think you are ready, do you? Yoda asked. Don't worry, I'm ready, he affirmed, nodding his head resolutely. Yondu placed a hand on Peter's shoulder. Prepare yourself. We've already scheduled meetings with both sides of the war, so we'll be leaving within the hour. As Peter turned to leave, a thought struck him. Should I bring my Walkman? He asked himself before ultimately deciding to take it. After all, it's not like he has to hide it from Yondu. Under the shadow of an unfeeling universe, a 12-year-old Nebula lay in her dimly lit bedroom, her body racked with pain from the latest mechanical enhancements forcibly grafted onto her. Each surgery, a grim reminder of her failures, and tonight's operation left her with a left hand that was no longer flesh and blood but cold, unyielding metal. As tears stained her cheeks, the harsh reality of her existence under Thanos' rule bore down on her, a supposed daughter to a monster, bound not by love but by relentless cruelty and ambition. In the depths of her despair, Nebula reached a breaking point. The thought of enduring another moment under Thanos' tyranny, another surgery, another defeat, was unbearable. With a newfound resolve, she decided to escape, to find a semblance of freedom in the vastness of space, away from the endless cycle of pain and humiliation. Moving quietly, she gathered what little belongings she could call her own. As she prepared to leave, a moment of hesitation washed over her. Gamera's room loomed ahead, a constant reminder of their complicated relationship, rivalry infused with a deep, unspoken longing for sisterhood. Despite everything, Nebula couldn't leave without offering Gamera a chance to flee with her. Knocking softly on Gamera's door, hope flickered within her. Seconds later, the door creaked open, and Gamera's figure appeared, her expression quickly souring upon seeing Nebula. Nebula's heart sank as Gamera's dismissive words cut through her, "Go away. I'm trying to sleep." No understanding, no compassion, just the same rejection Nebula had come to expect. The door slammed shut, leaving Nebula alone in the corridor. The pain of rejection stung, but it solidified her resolve. There was no turning back now. With silent tears drying on her cheeks, she made her way to the hangar. The absence of Thanos and his forces, off to spread more terror on some distant world, played to her advantage. Slipping into a small ship, barely noticed among the fleet, Nebula initiated the launch sequence. As the engines roared to life, she cast one last glance at the only home she'd ever known, now a prison she was leaving behind. With the stars as her witness, Nebula shot off into the night, leaving behind the agony and chains of her past, venturing into the unknown with nothing but a flicker of hope for a new beginning. C26 Nova Prime. I'm an alligator. I'm a mama papa common for you. I'm the space invader. I'll be a rock and rollin' B*TCH for you. Keep your mouth shut. You're squawking like a pink monkey bird and I'm bustin' up my brains for the words. Keep your electric eye on me, babe. Put your ray gun to my head. Press your space face close to mine, love. Freak out in a moonage daydream, oh yeah. Across the room, Mace Windu sat in a meditative pose, his expression serene yet marked with a touch of concern. Despite his focus, Windu's attention occasionally drifted to his Padawan. The sight of Peter, headphones on, lost in his music, sparked a mix of emotions in the Jedi Master. Windu understood the importance of detachment for a Jedi, yet Peter's unabashed connection to his music highlighted a defiance of those very principles. However, Windu couldn't ignore the bond of trust that this act of defiance also symbolized. Peter felt comfortable and safe enough to reveal his attachment to music in Windu's presence. It was a sign of trust, but also a challenge to the Jedi way of life. Windu recognized the need for a discussion about attachments and the path of the Jedi, but he chose to delay it. The mission they were on required focus, and there would be time for such lessons later. As the music played, a connection to his distant home, Peter's mind was occupied with a more immediate concern, the impending mission as a diplomat in the war between the Kree and Nova empires. The thought alone sent a rush of adrenaline through him. This wasn't just any mission. In this universe, the characters and stories from the Marvel movies he watched were real. And that realization was enough to make his heart race with excitement and anxiety. He could potentially meet Ronan the Accuser or even Captain Marvel if she was still suffering from amnesia and under the Kree's influence as Vare. Peter's fingers tapped rhythmically against the cold window as he pondered the possibilities. This is it. A real-life war between alien races, and I'm headed right in the middle of it, he thought to himself, feeling as if it wasn't real, though he knew it was. The thrill of leaving the Jedi Temple for such a crucial mission was undeniable, as he's been locked up for over 3 years, only ever leaving once to get his Kyber crystal. Yet, the danger that awaited them was real, and the thought of possibly fighting for his life against Ronan or trying to help Vare recover her memories, if he even could, brought a wave of nervousness he couldn't shake off. As these thoughts swirled in his head, Yondu opened his eyes from his meditation and regarded Peter with a measured look. "Feeling anxious?" he asked, his voice calm. Peter removed his headphones, turning to face his master. "A bit, yet. After all, it's not every day you get sent to change the course of a war." Yondu nodded, understanding the gravity of Peter's feelings. "Remember, Peter, strength in the Force is not the only way to resolve conflicts. Diplomacy, compassion, and understanding are just as powerful. Our goal is to bring peace, not to fight." Peter absorbed Yondu's words, finding comfort in them. "But what if it comes to a fight? Can we handle an entire army by ourselves? Or even worse, what if both sides attack us? Can we survive 2 armies targeting us? The odds of even a single side trying to harm us is quite low. After all, doing so would invite the Republic to take their enemy's side, which they most certainly don't want." Yondu explained, much more relaxed about this whole situation than his Padawan. "Besides, we're only here as diplomats, they have no reason to attack us. Trust in the Force, Peter. And trust in your training. You are more capable than you realize. And remember, I will be by your side. Together, we will face whatever comes our way." Reassured, Peter nodded, a newfound confidence settling within him. The conversation with Yondu helped calm his agitated nerves. Soon enough, the music from his Walkman resumed, and Peter allowed himself a moment to feel the excitement of the adventure that lay ahead. The journey to the Outer Rim was long, and as the ship emerged from hyperspace, the vastness of space greeted them with its usual indifference. Peter, sensing the shift in the ship's motion as they exited hyperspace, removed his headphones and turned to Yondu. "Are we close?" he asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. It was his first mission, and the gravity of it wasn't lost on him. Yondu nodded, "Yes, we are approaching the first meeting point. Remember, this mission is about diplomacy. We are here to listen, mediate, and guide them towards peace." He instructs, his demeanor turning serious. "Since this is your first mission, and a rather important one as well, try to stay silent for the most part and follow my lead." Peter nodded, absorbing Yondu's words. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The prospect of peace between the Kree and Nova empires was daunting and unlikely, yet he couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. "Maybe we can do it." The Jedi starship glided seamlessly towards the imposing fleet blockade of the Nova Empire. As it was granted access and docked within the main warship, Peter felt his anticipation rising, though he knew it wasn't the Nova Empire that would give them trouble. No, the real problems would no doubt begin as soon as they head over to the Kree army's blockade. But until that time came, this was it, their first real step into war, a war they were charged with ending. As Peter and Yondu stepped off their ship, they were greeted by the sharp lines of Nova Prime's delegation. The air was charged with tension, the Nova soldiers standing at attention, their gazes flickering between curiosity and skepticism. "Welcome, Jedi," Nova Prime began, a blonde-haired woman in a blue military uniform, her voice carrying authority. "I trust your journey was peaceful." "Yes." Master Yondu nodded, his expression relaxed. "Thank you, Nova Prime. The Force was kind to us." Peter, catching the odd glances of the soldiers, couldn't help but ask, "Is there a reason why they keep looking at us like that?" A murmur ran through the ranks of soldiers, some exchanging brief, amused glances before catching themselves. Nova Prime, however, maintained her composure, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Rumors have a way of painting pictures far from reality," she responded. "But rest assured, we understand the significance of your mission and the Jedi's commitment to peace." One of the soldiers, unable to contain his doubt, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Nova Prime, are we sure they can handle the Kree? They don't even carry blasters." Another followed after him, "Yet, I thought Jedi were supposed to be unstoppable warriors or something, but all I see is a couple of monks." He scoffed as he turned to Peter, "And one of them is just a kid. This is a war zone, you know. What are the Jedi thinking sending a child here?" Feeling the weight of their doubts, Peter decided on a demonstration. With a sly grin, he extended his hand, focusing with a mix of concentration and a flair for the dramatic. In an instant, the surrounding soldiers save for the respectfully poised Nova Prime found themselves suspended 3 feet in the air. Their expressions morphed from skepticism to outright shock, legs kicking as they tried to regain some semblance of control. The scene was chaotic, a stark contrast to the disciplined ranks moments before. Wide-eyed soldiers flailed, their exclamations filling the air, a mix of disbelief and alarm punctuating the silence that followed Peter's unexpected show of force. Yondu turned towards Peter, his voice commanding as it cut through the commotion. "Let them down, Peter," he said, the displeasure clear in his tone. With an awkward chuckle, realizing perhaps the extent of his impulsive demonstration, Peter complied. The soldiers, once suspended in disbelief, came crashing down in a less than graceful heap. The impact was met with a mix of groans and the rustling of armor, a physical and ego-bruising fall from their brief flight. Yondu, surveying the scene with a measured gaze, turned back to Peter, his question rhetorical yet pointed. "Really? You couldn't have been gentler?" Peter, shoulders shrugging with a mix of defiance and sheepishness, responded, "It was just a couple of feet off the ground." In the aftermath, as soldiers picked themselves up, their previous skepticism replaced with a newfound respect if not a touch of wariness towards the Jedi. Seated in an opulent conference room that reflected the might and prestige of the Nova Corps, Peter and Yondu listened with rapt attention. Nova Prime stood at the head of the table, her expression somber as she delved into the heart of the conflict that threatened the very fabric of peace in the galaxy. "The Kree, emboldened by their last victory over the Skrulls, have now set their sights on us," Nova Prime began, her voice carrying the weight of the situation. "Their expansionist ambitions know no bounds, and it has brought them to our doorstep. This isn't merely a war, it's a fight for our very survival against an adversary that recognizes no limits in its quest for domination." As she spoke, her disdain for the Kree's tactics, especially those employed by the accusers, became increasingly evident. Her fists clenched slightly as she continued, "Under the command of Ronan and his accusers, the Kree army has committed unspeakable atrocities: genocide, the deliberate targeting of civilians, the annihilation of entire planets. Their actions are not just acts of war but crimes against the very essence of life." Peter exchanged a glance with Yondu, both sensing the gravity of Nova Prime's words. Nova Prime paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in before she added, "Should the Kree succeed in their campaign against us, I fear the Republic might very well be their next target. We are not just fighting for the Nova Empire, we are fighting to prevent a dominion of tyranny from spreading across the galaxy." After absorbing the gravity of Nova Prime's briefing, the tension in the room felt as thick as the walls of the starship itself. Peter, whose demeanor had remained composed and thoughtful throughout, finally broke the silence, his voice carrying both concern and a hint of resolve. "Nova Prime, you know why we're here, right? Is the Nova Empire willing to negotiate an end to this conflict or not?" Nova Prime, her expression mirroring the seriousness of the conversation, sighed lightly before responding. "We are," she admitted, a note of fatigue in her voice. "But I must confess, my skepticism towards the Kree's willingness to engage in peace talks is high. We have extended offers on numerous occasions, only to be met with silence or outright refusal." Yondu nodded, his face a mask of understanding. "The willingness to seek peace, even when faced with such obstinance, is commendable. But please, leave the matter of the Kree to us. As long as the Nova Empire stands ready to embrace peace, that's what truly matters. We will do everything in our power to bring them to the negotiating table." Nova Prime looked at Yondu, then at Peter, and a slight, appreciative smile crept upon her lips. "Your confidence gives me hope. We will prepare for peace and await the outcome of your efforts." The meeting with Nova Prime, though heavy with the dire circumstances of war, had slowly shifted towards a conclusion. Strategies were laid, hopes kindled anew, and yet, as the participants rose to say their goodbyes, Peter remained seated, a contemplative look painting his features. "Nova Prime," Peter started, his voice piercing the settling silence with an unexpected question, "do you happen to know the location of a planet called Earth? It could also be called C-53, Terra, or Midgard." The room stilled, the unexpected question drawing curious glances. Mace Windu's brow arched in surprise, a silent question in his gaze directed at Peter. After all, this seemed far from their mission's objectives. Nova Prime, momentarily taken aback, recovered smoothly. "May I ask why you inquire about this, Earth?" "It's my home world," Peter explained, a mix of hopefulness and resignation in his tone. I've been trying to track down its location for a while now. Yondu's expression subtly shifted to a frown, the Jedi Master pondering over Peter's evident attachment to his past, a concern given the Jedi's teachings on detachment and letting go. Nova Prime observed Peter for a lingering moment, perhaps weighing the relevance of his request. With a slight shrug, she signaled to her aides. Check our star charts for any of these designations, she commanded. The room waited in a suspended state as the aides hurried to comply. Minutes ticked by, stretching Peter's anticipation thin until the aides returned, their expressions apologetic. We couldn't find any record of a planet matching those names or designations, one reported, his voice bearing the weight of disappointment. Peter's shoulders slumped, a sigh escaping him. Though he had braced for this outcome, it still stung ever so slightly. Thank you for checking, I appreciate the help nonetheless. Yondu noticed the depressed air his Padawan was giving off, and sighed alongside him. Nothing was ever easy with this student of his. C-27 Ronan the Accuser. Nebula's escape into the uncharted stretches of space was fueled by a single, burning desire, to distance herself as far from Thanos and his oppressive rule as possible. With every parsec she put between herself and the horrors of her past, she hoped to find a sliver of peace or at least a respite from the relentless torment she had endured. Her ship hummed through the cosmos, leaving trails of light in its wake, no set destination in mind, only a direction away from her father's territory. Out of wild space, past the treacherous expanse of the unknown regions, and into the more charted territories of the Outer Rim. As she navigated the labyrinth of stars, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, relief, and an indomitable will to survive. The pain from her latest enhancements still throbbed through her, a constant reminder of what she was escaping from, but it also served to steel her resolve. But freedom, it seemed, would not come so easily. Not long after she entered the border of the Outer Rim, a sudden alarm blared through the cockpit. Nebula's heart sank as she saw the reason: a long blockade of warships arranged in a formidable wall, stretched out before her. Before she could even think of a detour, the blockade sprung to life, opening fire with merciless precision. Her ship shuddered under the impact of the plasma blasts, alarms screaming in protest as critical systems began to fail. The engines, the lifeblood of her ship, took a direct hit, sputtering and dying in a final, defiant roar. Nebula's heart raced as she braced for the end. Stranded and powerless, she awaited the final barrage that would break her ship apart, expecting to meet her death in the cold, indifferent vacuum of space. At least I won't have to worry about returning to the hell anymore, she thought, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Instead of the lethal finish she anticipated, a tractor beam locked onto her crippled vessel, pulling it toward the largest warship of the bunch. Nebula sat, resigned, in her pilot's chair, her thoughts a mix of apprehension and despair as her ship was swallowed by the gaping maw of the warship's hangar. After meeting with Nova Prime, the Jedi starship departed from the Nova Empire's blockade, on its way toward their next scheduled meeting, which would no doubt be far more daunting than the last. Yondu turned his gaze to Peter, who sat enveloped in contemplation, a frown marring his features. His brow furrowed, a storm of thoughts raging within him. What weighs on your mind, Peter? Yondu inquired, his voice calm and steady. Peter's eyes flickered with uncertainty before he voiced his concerns. Do you think we should call for backup? After everything Nova Prime said, the Kree, Ronan and the other accusers, they don't seem like the type to be reasoned with. Yondu's expression hardened slightly, and after a brief pause, he nodded. I'll send a message back to Coruscant detailing our situation. But our meeting with the Kree proceeds as planned. Ending this war is our #1 priority. Peter nodded, a resigned expression on his face. Despite the reassurance, a shadow of foreboding clung to him, whispering doubts of the coming encounter with the Kree. I have a bad feeling about this. With their message to the Republic dispatched, soon enough, the formidable Kree blockade came into view, the atmosphere within the cockpit growing tense in an instant. Just as they were about to hail them and announce their arrival, suddenly, the closest Kree ship opened fire, a barrage of plasma artillery, streaking across the void with lethal intent. They're firing at us, Peter warned, his worries coming to fruition. Yondu's eyes widened as he took the controls, and swiftly maneuvered the ship, weaving their vessel through the deadly onslaught with unnatural precision and skill, the force guiding him. Yondu's focus was unbreakable, his voice only slightly strained. It seems Nova Prime wasn't exaggerating. Each evasive maneuver was accompanied by plasma fire that just nearly missed its target. As Yondu continued to evade, Peter opened a channel, hailing the hostile fleet before them. "Hold your fire! This is Jedi Master Mace Windu and Padawan Peter Quill, emissaries of the Galactic Republic. We are not hostile, I repeat, we are not hostile." Seconds later, the ship stopped firing before a response crackled over the speakers. Cold and laced with disdain, the Kree answered. "Jedi. Your reputation precedes you. Ronan the Accuser will receive you, but know this: any treachery will be met with swift and ruthless retribution." Peter's heart raced at the mention of Ronan's name, his hand instinctively moving to his lightsaber. "He's here." Ronan may not have been one of the strongest villains in the MCU or Marvel, but he was certainly powerful enough, especially compared to Peter, who was just a Jedi Padawan. A very impressive Padawan, but still a Padawan nonetheless. Peter glanced at his master. Is Yondu strong enough to handle him? He wondered. If there's one thing that Peter's noticed through his time in the Jedi, it's that they seem stronger than they were in the movies, so Yondu might stand a chance. It all depends on just how strong this version of Ronan is. Yondu, sensing his Padawan's surging emotions, spoke, breaking Peter from his thoughts. "Relax, trust in the Force. We walk a path of peace, even if it leads us into danger." Peter nodded, forcefully calming himself. "Okay, but that doesn't change the fact that they fired at us, which isn't a good sign." "I understand," Yondu acknowledged, guiding their ship towards the docking bay of the largest warship. "But that doesn't change our mission. Keep yourself under control and remember, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. You must rise above your fears." Peter resisted the urge to roll his eyes, as he'd heard this countless times in the Jedi Temple. "Yes, Master." Nodding his head once again, he prepared himself for what was to come. In the bowels of the massive Kree warship, the air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. Ronan the Accuser, a towering blue-skinned figure cloaked in the traditional armor of his people, stood amidst a large room littered with the lifeless, mangled bodies of his own soldiers. Insert picture of Ronan the Accuser here. Before him, a lone Kree soldier knelt, quivering in fear. His eyes, wide with terror, darted between Ronan and the gruesome scene that surrounded him. "Please, Accuser," the soldier begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "I swear, I will never defy your orders again. We just couldn't bring ourselves to kill those innocent people." Ronan sneered in disdain, his gaze cold and unfeeling. "Mercy," he spat the word out like venom, "is a disease. A weakness that infects the weak-minded, such as yourself. You and your comrades were tasked with cleansing that city of its impurities, purging it in the name of Kree superiority. Yet you chose to defy my orders and spare them. Pathetic." He lifted his mighty hammer, the universal weapon, its surface edged with ancient runes and glowing with a malevolent purple light. The kneeling soldier's pleas escalated into hysterical begging, his voice echoing off the cold, hard walls of the room. But Ronan's gaze remained unswayed, his conviction unbreakable. And with a swift, merciless motion, Ronan swung his hammer down. Crunch, the sound of the impact was sickening, a wet, crushing noise that signified the end of the soldier's pleas, his head obliterated in an instant. The body slumped forward, a final, silent testament to Ronan's brutal form of justice, as even more blood pooled onto the floor. The grim silence that followed was suddenly broken by the hurried footsteps of another soldier. The newcomer froze at the door, horror-stricken by the carnage before him. Ronan, unfazed, flicked the blood from his hammer with a practiced swing and turned to the soldier, his gaze demanding. "Report." Regaining his composure, the soldier hastily delivered his message. "The Jedi have arrived, Accuser," he reported, his voice barely above a whisper. Ronan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, a dark intrigue flickering within them as he strode from the room, his heavy steps resolute. "Clean up this mess," he commanded over his shoulder, leaving the soldier to deal with the aftermath. Alone, the soldier eyed his deceased comrades, gulping in fear as he got to work. After all, this could be him if he didn't do as he was told. As their ship touched down in the cavernous hangar of the Kree warship, Peter and Yondu emerged to a less than welcoming sight. They found themselves encircled by a contingent of Kree soldiers, weapons drawn and aimed squarely at them. The tension in the air was palpable, each soldier's finger seemingly itching at the trigger. Yondu's expression darkened slightly, his concerns beginning to mirror Peter's earlier apprehensions. Yet, amidst the standoff, his composure remained unshaken. Peter, on the other hand, was a coil of readiness. His hand hovered near his lightsaber, his instincts screaming for action. He was not about to be caught off guard, not here, not now. This second chance at life was precious, and he was determined not to squander it. Before the situation could deteriorate further, the crowd of soldiers parted like the sea, making way for Ronan the Accuser, his presence commanding attention. Peter's hand instinctively went to his lightsaber, ready to draw it at a moment's notice. His gaze locked onto Ronan, analyzing, calculating. Even as their commander arrived, the soldiers didn't lower their weapons, keeping them aimed at the Jedi, awaiting Ronan's orders. And just as Ronan prepared to speak, a commotion at the far end of the hangar caught everyone's attention. A group of Kree soldiers were struggling with a defiant blue-skinned little girl, pulling her from a battered ship. She fought back fiercely, wielding electrified batons that dropped soldiers to their knees with every strike. Peter watched, intrigued and somewhat impressed by her skills. She knows how to handle herself well. However, despite her valiant efforts, the odds quickly turned against her, and she was subdued by a numerical advantage. With her restrained and immobile, the soldiers who had their A*SES handed to them only moments ago stepped up to get their licks in, kicking and stomping the downed girl before dragging her away by her hair. A/N, yes, she has hair still. Her cybernetic enhancements haven't gotten to that point yet. Peter clenched his fists, anger bubbling within him at the sight of the little girl being mistreated so callously. He barely contained the urge to intervene, the force shaking around him. Sensing his Padawan's rising fury, Yondu placed a calming hand on Peter's shoulder, a silent reminder of their purpose and the need for restraint. His gaze, stern yet understanding, conveyed a message louder than words: this was not their fight, not here, not now. Ronan, having observed the entire scene, finally addressed his guests. "Apologies for the disturbance and the less than cordial reception," he said, motioning for his men to lower their blasters, his tone carrying an unexpected note of civility. Peter stared at Ronan, skepticism rising. What's he up to? Accepting Ronan's apology with a nod, Yondu maintained his composed demeanor. "It's no problem at all. We understand the complexities of these times and the precautions they necessitate. However, let us be clear, our mission here is peaceful. We seek dialogue, not conflict." "Yes, of course, please, follow me. We have much to discuss." C28 The Ruse of Peace. The creaking of metal against metal reverberated through the corridor as a prison cell door swung open. With a brutish shove, the Kree soldiers practically threw Nebula inside, causing her to stumble forward as the cell door slammed shut behind her. Swiftly turning around, she yelled, "Let me out! You have no right to hold me! Shut your mouth!" One of the soldiers shouted back, poking one of Nebula's confiscated batons through a gap in the door, sending her crashing to the floor, convulsing from the electricity. "Ha ha!" Their laughter, cold and mocking, trailed off as they backed away from the cell, taking the baton with them. Alone, Nebula found herself sprawled across the cold, hard floor, pain radiating from every injury she had endured. She pushed herself up, and with a fierce cry, she unleashed her frustration on the unyielding door, kicking it repeatedly as if her sheer will could break through the durasteel. Bang, 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 each thud was a release, a desperate attempt to vent the anger and hurt that boiled within her. But as her energy waned, so too did the fire of her anger, leaving in its wake a crushing sense of despair. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, her body trembling not just from exertion but from the onslaught of emotions she struggled to contain. Nebula sank to the floor, her back against the cold, unforgiving metal, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered to the uncaring walls, the question barely audible. "Why is my life always like this?" The echo of her own voice in the empty cell was the only answer she received. Exhausted and defeated, Nebula curled up on the floor, the tears that she had fought so hard to keep at bay now flowing freely. And in the quiet of her cell, accompanied only by the echo of her sobs, Nebula was struck by a saddening realization: no matter where she went, and no matter how hard she tried, life always seemed to find a way to knock her back down. Meanwhile, as Nebula was getting locked away, Peter and Yondu sat across from Ronan the Accuser. The soldiers that followed them waited outside, guarding the door to the opulent meeting room. Despite the gravity of the moment, Peter couldn't help but scrutinize Ronan, his instincts tingling with skepticism. "His smile is creeping me out." Ronan's initial words were laced with a veneer of gratitude, his voice smooth, almost disarming. "I commend the Republic's efforts in seeking peace amidst such trying times as these no doubt are. The sacrifices made by all parties have not gone unnoticed, especially by me. Peter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ronan's cordial demeanor seemed at odds with everything he knew about the man, a warmonger whose hands were stained with the blood of countless innocents. This isn't the Ronan I expected, he thought, wary of the words that felt too polished, too rehearsed. As the conversation began, Peter decided to cut to the chase, uncomfortable with Ronan's odd behavior. Let's not dance around the topic. You know why we're here. So, is the Kree Empire willing to negotiate peace? Yes, of course. Ronan immediately agreed, but something told Peter that he didn't mean what he said. Yondu followed after him, leaning forward in his chair. Good, we must find a way to end this conflict as swiftly as possible. Too many innocent lives have been lost already. Ronan nodded thoughtfully, his expression seemingly open and considerate. Indeed, the preservation of life is paramount. Peter, however, was not convinced. He leaned in, eyes narrowed. Really? He asked, voice laced with suspicion. Given what we've heard, it seems like you haven't shown much concern for the lives of innocents. Yondu gave Peter a quick look, seemingly unhappy with his question. After all, they're trying to negotiate peace, not throw around accusations that could very well sour the mood and ruin their mission. Ronan paused, his gaze shifting as if choosing his words carefully. Unfortunately, in the nature of war, casualties are inevitable, regardless of our caution, he responded with a hint of feigned melancholy. Yet, his words completely avoided Peter's accusation, justifying his war crimes as if they were mere accidents. Yes, but let's focus on the future, Yondu interjected, hoping to get back on track. We're aiming for a future free from war and its fallout. How about we organize a meeting with the Nova Empire to work out the specifics? We'd act as mediators, of course. To ensure both sides are heard and a fair, balanced resolution is agreed upon. Ronan paused, then spoke carefully. A peaceful future is all the Kree Empire can hope for, but the situation is complicated. I'm afraid that meeting with the Nova Empire now isn't possible. We have long-standing issues and rebuilding trust would take time. He shifted, a hint of evasion in his voice. Also, while our ruler, the Supreme Intelligence, is open to the idea of peace, a final decision hasn't been made. Suggesting a meeting without full leadership support might be too soon, maybe even risky. It's not the right time yet. But that doesn't mean we're not open to it, just that we need to be careful and consider everything involved. Peter's frustration bubbled to the surface. It sounds to me like you're just making excuses and stalling, he accused, unable to hold back. Does the Kree Empire truly want peace, or are we just here to listen as you spout bullsh*t? Ronan's lip twitched ever so slightly, but ultimately, his expression remained unchanged, the facade of diplomacy uncracked. I understand your concerns. Rest assured, our discussions are a step towards the peace we all desire. Peter exchanged a glance with Yondu, both recognizing the roundabout tactic. Ronan was playing them, weaving a narrative of cooperation while strategically dodging any commitment. With each evasive response, Ronan's strategy unfolded a charade of peace talks to keep the Republic happy, but ultimately at arm's length, so as not to intrude on his war against the Nova Empire. Peter's patience wore thin as Ronan deflected every concrete proposal with excuses of internal politics and the need for further deliberation. The realization that Ronan had no intention of reaching a genuine agreement was a bitter pill to swallow. Even with clear signs of Ronan's deceit, he kept pushing for more peace talks, suggesting future meetings with what seemed like real sincerity. His ability to steer the conversation away from hard truths to vague ideas of peace was frustratingly clever. As Ronan stood up, seemingly ending the meeting, he extended his hand, his voice smooth. Thank you for this fruitful discussion. I'm hopeful for what our future talks will bring, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Peter exchanged a look with Yondu, both sensing the emptiness behind the words, neither reaching over to shake his hand. Seeing that they refused to shake his hand, Ronan's expression shifted subtly, his smirk revealing a glimmer of satisfaction. He had recognized their skepticism and suspicions, understanding that they were likely onto his ruse. Yet, he knew they were powerless to confront him directly. As ambassadors in this delicate negotiation, they were bound by protocols and expectations, they couldn't simply lash out or initiate a confrontation. This restraint played well into Ronan's hands, allowing him to maintain the upper hand. With a slight, smug smile, Ronan smoothly withdrew his unshaken hand, nodding to the duo. Well, it appears I must attend to some pressing matters. My men will escort you back to your ship, he stated, his tone casual yet dismissive, as if concluding a trivial conversation rather than a critical negotiation. As Ronan exited the room, leaving the two to ponder their next moves, Peter turned to Yondu, a mix of frustration and annoyance in his voice. Honestly, even though I was scared we'd get ambushed and have to fight our way out of here, I kind of wish we had. Anything would have been better than the cruel and unusual torture we just experienced. Yondu, with a slight scoff that carried a world of agreement, nodded. It's clear that the Kree have no intentions of peace. This was nothing more than a charade to appease the Republic. They're simply stalling and playing games to ensure that we don't join the war. Peter let out a small chuckle. Yeah right, like the Senate would ever vote to join someone else's war out of the kindness of their hearts. The Republic doesn't even have a standing army. He said, at least not yet. True, it's unlikely, but it's always possible. The Republic could decide to build an army at any time, after all. As Peter and Yondu were led back through the metallic corridors of the Kree flagship, Peter's thoughts were far from the failed negotiation, refusing to let Ronan the accuser get to him. Instead, a haunting image lingered in his mind, that of a young girl, her face marred by distress and weariness, being dragged away by the guards. Something about her struck a chord within him, a flicker of familiarity that he couldn't quite put a finger on. After some thought, Peter turned to the soldiers escorting them, a mix of concern in his voice. What happened to that girl from earlier? Is she all right? With a sadistic smile, one of the soldiers replied, we gave her a good thrashing, shocked her a bit for fun, then tossed her in a cell. She's probably still there, licking her wounds. Peter felt a surge of rage, recalling his time in captivity. Beside him, Yondu's expression hardened, though his stance remained controlled, a stark contrast to Peter's emotional state. Without warning, Peter's arms shot out, a telekinetic force unseen yet powerful slamming the soldiers into the nearby, metal walls. They crumpled to the ground, unconscious before they could even comprehend what had happened. Yondu, taken aback, stared at Peter. What are you doing? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief and a hint of admonishment. Peter, undeterred, shot back, doing what a real Jedi would do. He approached a soldier, still dazed on the ground, and gave him a sharp slap to the face, jolting him awake. Yondu watched, speechless as Peter leaned in, his focus intense. Then, with a wave of his hand and a calm yet commanding tone, he spoke, where is the prison? And which part of it is the girl in? Explain in detail. Yondu's mouth dropped open as the soldier's eyes glazed over, and responded with the precise location, his voice devoid of its earlier sadistic pleasure. With the information he needed, Peter bashed the soldier's head against the wall, sending him to sleep alongside his comrades. Turning away, he marched down the hall, headed towards the prison. Peter, stop! Yondu commanded, his voice firm. But Peter didn't reply and continued walking, leaving Yondu to decide whether to follow him or not. Sighing, Yondu took a deep breath before trailing after his Padawan, knowing that he would later regret his decision. This kid will be the death of me. C29 Unwilling Damsel. In the corridors of the Kree flagship, the tension between master and apprentice escalated with every step they took toward the prison sector. Their path was marked by the sounds of combat, as each encounter with Kree soldiers became a clash, leaving the halls filled with incapacitated bodies. Peter, driven by a fury ignited by the Kree's cruel actions against a seemingly innocent child, moved with a determination that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. His attacks on the soldiers were ruthless, combining his force-enhanced strength and the skills he's honed for over 3 years in the Jedi Temple, leaving a path of defeated Kree in his wake. Yondu, though hesitant at first, found himself drawn into the fray, working in tandem with his apprentice. Yet, his heart wasn't in the fight, not like Peter's. He fought because he had to look after his student, not because he wanted to. Of course, he felt bad for the poor, captured girl, but saving her wasn't their mission. Their mission was far greater than just a single life. Yondu glanced over at Peter, his mind clouded with the Jedi Code, which preached detachment and warned against letting his emotions sway him, which his apprentice was most definitely doing right now. Their journey through the ship was punctuated by their arguments, their voices low but filled with intensity. Peter, we must think this through, Yondu urged, blocking a punch from an oncoming soldier before knocking him out with a swift, calculated strike. Rushing in, driven by your emotions, will only lead to recklessness. Peter, however, was unmoved. That's where you're wrong, he retorted, launching another unsuspecting group of soldiers against the wall with a gesture of his hand. Sometimes, you gotta listen to what your gut's telling you. And mine is screaming that leaving that girl to suffer isn't the Jedi way, or at least, it shouldn't be. Besides, Peter continued, glancing back at his master. My emotions aren't controlling me. I'm simply doing what I know is right. The discord between them grew as they advanced, their differing views clashing as fiercely as their assault on the Kree. Yondu's calm, controlled approach to combat contrasted sharply with Peter's aggressive tactics. Yet, despite their disagreements, they were a formidable force, their combined strength leaving no soldier standing in their path. As they neared the entrance to the prison sector, Yondu continued lecturing Peter, "You still have much to learn, Peter. Acting on impulse and emotion, even if you are still in control, these are the ways of the dark side, not the Jedi. We must always remain aware, yet detached from our emotions, something you are evidently struggling with." Instantly, Peter's frustration boiled over. He stopped abruptly, turning to face Yondu with fire in his eyes. "You keep rambling on about the Jedi Code, but what about compassion? What about defending those who can't defend themselves?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the empty corridor. Yondu, taken aback by the intensity of Peter's words, remained silent for a moment. The Jedi Master was known for his wisdom and experience, yet in that moment, he seemed to be searching for answers. Has this become the way of the Jedi? Claiming to be guardians of peace yet standing by while innocent people are left to suffer? Peter continued, his anger giving way to a profound disappointment. Because if that's the case, then maybe I've been wasting the last 3 years of my life. The question hung in the air between them, a challenge that went beyond their current mission. It was a question of morality, of the very essence of what it meant to be a Jedi. Yondu's expression softened, the weight of Peter's words sinking in. "The Jedi are guardians of peace and justice," he began slowly, his voice steady. "But perhaps, in our pursuit of detachment, we've forgotten the importance of compassion." The acknowledgement didn't instantly heal the rift between them, but it offered a glimmer of understanding. "Glad you could finally take that stick out of your ass and think properly," Peter commented, a smile on his face. "It must have been jammed pretty far up there." "Language," Yondu warned, his expression morphing to match his apprentice. As the tension between them began to fade, suddenly, the sound of alarms blared through the corridors. Peter and Yondu froze, turning their attention to the urgent wail that echoed off the metal walls. The tension between them may have vanished, but now another sort of tension began to rise. Closing his eyes, Peter reached out with the force, his senses expanding to encompass the entire ship, feeling a flurry of activity converging on their location. The life signatures of countless soldiers, previously scattered throughout the ship, now moved with a singular purpose toward them. "It's like a swarm," Peter muttered, a frown creasing his brow as he estimated their numbers. "We've got..." Before he could finish speaking, Yondu, sensing the same impending threat through the force, cut him off. "I know. They must have finally figured out what's going on. We don't have much time, let's find that girl and get out of here, quickly," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Guess we're finally on the same page now," Peter said with a quick, appreciative smile. Yondu merely nodded, his focus already shifting towards their next move. In a dimly lit prison cell, Nebula sat curled up on the cold metal floor, her gaze vacant and defeated. The tears that had once threatened to overwhelm her had dried up an hour ago, leaving behind a deep, unshakable sense of despair. She had long since given up any hope of escape or rescue. After all, her life seemed to be an endless cycle of suffering, first thanks to her father, Thanos, and now the Kree. The sound of a distant alarm briefly pierced her bubble of desolation. She lifted her head, her eyes narrowing as she tried to decipher the cause of the commotion. A flicker of curiosity sparked within her, though it was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of her situation. Most prisoners might cling to hope, imagining a rescuer coming for them or dreaming of an opportunity to escape. But Nebula knew better. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Who would come for her? Thanos? The thought was almost laughable. She'd rather meet her end in this cell than get saved by her tyrant of a father. Resigned to her fate, she barely reacted to the sound of footsteps approaching her cell. She assumed it was just another guard passing by or perhaps returning to taunt her. She didn't even bother to stand, let alone prepare for any confrontation. But then, the footsteps stopped right outside her cell, and confusion mingled with a hint of fear. She watched, frozen, as a black energy blade, pulsating with white light, suddenly pierced through the door. The blade moved with precision, cutting through the metal as easily as if it were butter. Nebula scrambled backward, her heart pounding, pressing herself against the wall as if it could offer any real protection. The door, now severed from its hinges, clattered to the ground with a resounding thud. Standing in the doorway was a figure she had never expected to see, a handsome boy in slim, form-fitting Jedi robes, holding an all-black lightsaber at his side. Peter Quill waved casually as he deactivated his lightsaber, clipping it back onto his belt. "Hey there," he said with a grin that was both reassuring and out of place in the grim surroundings. "I came to save you." Nebula stared at him, her mind racing. This boy, this Jedi, had come for her? Why? Her initial shock slowly gave way to a wariness born from years of hardship and manipulation. Yet, despite her suspicions, she couldn't deny the small ember of hope that his presence kindled within her. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes never left Peter's, searching for any hint of deceit or hidden agenda. But all she found was a simple, kind-hearted sincerity that she hadn't seen in a long, long time. "I saw what happened to you back in the hangar," Peter began, his voice calm and empathetic. "I couldn't just walk away and leave you here." Nebula's eyes, sharp with suspicion, remained fixed on him. "Why? You don't even know me. Why go through all this trouble?" Her voice was tinged with disbelief, not used to the concept of someone risking their life for her without an ulterior motive. Peter simply smiled, casually introducing himself despite the circumstances. "I'm Peter. And you are?" Reluctantly, she responded, "Nebula." Instantly, recognition sparked in Peter's eyes. "Nebula," he murmured, noting the few cybernetic enhancements along her body. Quickly composing himself, he offered her a warm, reassuring smile. "Well, now I know you, and you know me. So, can I save you now, or were you planning on staying here indefinitely?" "I haven't decided yet," Nebula replied, her voice flat, betraying the depth of her resignation. Peter's concern deepened at her words, sensing the profound despair that had taken root in her. But before he could respond, Yondu's voice echoed from around the corner, urging them to hurry. "Peter, we need to move now. It won't be long before they're here." Choosing to ignore Yondu's urgency for the moment, Peter focused on the person in front of him. Nebula's spirit seemed as fractured as her body, her will to live extinguished by years of suffering. "Well, if you're not leaving, then neither am I," he declared, half joking yet entirely serious, taking a seat on the floor across from her. "We can stay here together, and either die or get locked up forever, I guess." Nebula's frustration rose at his nonchalant attitude toward danger. "Just leave already," she snapped, the first sign of life in her voice since he'd arrived. But Peter remained unfazed, his resolve clear. "Are you coming with me?" he asked, meeting her gaze. When she didn't respond, he shrugged, adding, "Then I guess I'm staying. Can't leave you here all by yourself, can I?" The absurdity of the situation finally broke through Nebula's walls. With a huff of annoyance, she stood, facing away from him. "Fine, I'll leave with you. But only to get you out of here," she conceded, her tone begrudging yet laced with a reluctant gratitude. Deep down, she recognized the rarity of his kindness, even if she wasn't ready to fully accept or admit it. Peter grinned, standing up to join her. "That's more like it," he said, noticing how injured she seemed. "Now hop on and let's get out of here." "Hey!" Nebula grunted in confusion as Peter turned around and dropped to one knee, glancing back at her expectantly. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Giving you a ride, now hop on," he instructed, ready to give her a piggyback ride. "No, I can walk on my own." She turned him down. Peter's patience thinned as Nebula stubbornly refused his offer. "Look, we're going to be moving fast, faster than you can on your own, especially in your condition," he explained, trying to reason with her one last time. Yet, her response was a defiant cross of her arms, signaling a clear refusal. With a sigh of exasperation, Peter decided that enough was enough. He stood, swiftly closed the distance between them, and without warning, scooped Nebula into his arms in a princess carry. "We don't have time for this," he said firmly, as he stepped out of the cell, holding her. Nebula, caught off guard by his sudden action, flailed and protested loudly, "Put me down. I can walk on my own." But Peter focused on the task at hand and ignored her complaints as they quickly met up with Yondu, who waited around the corner. And the moment they started running, Nebula realized the truth in Peter's words. The world around them blurred, their speed rivaling that of a low-powered speeder. Overwhelmed and unable to maintain her initial resistance, Nebula instinctively wrapped her arms tightly around Peter's neck, her face warming with a blush of embarrassment at the closeness. Dodging and weaving through the ship, they managed to avoid most of the soldiers, dispatching those they couldn't avoid with swift precision and coordination. However, as they entered the hangar where their ship awaited, they came to an abrupt stop, the sight before them halting them in their tracks. Ronan the Accuser stood there, flanked by his most elite guards, his gaze fixed on them with a chilling intensity. C-30 bloodied hands. Ronan stood between Peter's group and their ship, leaning against his staff-like hammer as if it were a cane. I must admit, your tenacity is admirable. But did you truly believe you could escape the grasp of the Kree Justice so easily? You've led quite the chase, but all roads end here. Surrender now, and perhaps I will consider sparing your lives. As Ronan the Accuser's cold and unyielding voice echoed through the hangar, Yondu stepped forward, his stance one of calm authority yet ready for conflict. Ronan, he began, his voice firm but carrying a note of diplomacy, we wish to resolve this peacefully. Simply let us leave, and we will avoid further conflict. Ronan's laughter was a sharp, dismissive sound that bounced off the hangar's walls. After you've injured countless Kree soldiers, and disrupted the order of this ship, now, you stand before me with one of our prisoners and ask for peace. He shook his head, his eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and contempt. How could I possibly accept that? Behind Ronan, the elite guards shifted, their weapons trained with deadly precision on Peter, Yondu, and Nebula. The tension in the air thickened, a tangible pressure that seemed to compress the very atmosphere. Peter, sensing the imminent threat, acted swiftly. With a subtle gesture, he used the force to lift Nebula onto his back, freeing his hands. His right hand moved to his belt, fingers wrapping around the hilt of his lightsaber. Nebula's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she found herself floating before landing gently on Peter's back, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck once more. Yondu raised a hand, not yet drawing his weapon. There's no need for violence, Ronan. Let us depart, and we will not trouble you further. And would you leave the prisoner behind? Ronan inquired. But before Yondu could answer, Peter responded without hesitation, hell no. Ronan's smile was malicious, expecting that answer. Then it seems we've hit an impasse. Now surrender, and I will personally see to it that the Republic hears of your treachery. I'm confident they'll appreciate seeing the security footage of your actions today. He proposed, his gaze flickering over to Nebula with a disdainful sneer. And as for the girl, though she holds little value, I'm certain we can find a use for her. Nebula, though she couldn't physically confront Ronan from her position on Peter's back, met his gaze with a fierce, defiant glare. Yeah, no thanks. Peter refused as he felt Nebula tighten her grip on him as if to reassure herself. Now get out of our way. He threatened, his hand grasping the lightsaber at this point. Yondu remained silent, his hand finally moving to his lightsaber as well, waiting to see what Ronan decided to do. Ronan's response to their refusal was swift. Lifting his hammer with a flourish, he signaled his men. As they opened fire, Peter and Yondu drew and ignited their sabers, the glowing blades coming to life with a hiss. The air was filled with the sound of blaster bolts being deflected, their bright streaks redirected away from their intended targets by the swift movements of the Jedi's sabers. Peter, with Nebula securely on his back, moved with surprising agility, his focus split between protecting her and the coming counterattack. In a moment of calculated risk, Peter redirected a bolt straight at Ronan, who, with the swift movement of his hammer, batted it aside as if it were nothing more than an annoyance. He began to advance, his every step menacing, a predator closing in on his prey. Ronan targeted Peter, his eyes ablaze with a sadistic fury. The Kree warlord's advance was a sight to behold, a mixture of raw power and unwavering resolve. As he launched himself at Peter, swinging his universal weapon, Yondu sprang into action, intercepting the blow meant for his apprentice. The clash between Yondu's lightsaber and Ronan's staff-like hammer was a spectacle of sparking energy and raw power. The lightsaber, a weapon capable of cutting through nearly anything, met the glowing hammer, surprising Yondu as it withstood his purple blade's raw cutting power. Locked in combat, Yondu glanced over his shoulder, his gaze meeting Peter's. Take care of Ronan's men and start the ship, he commanded, his voice steady despite the strain of the contest. With a focused push of his force abilities, Yondu sent Ronan sliding back, disrupting the Kree's advance and opening a path for Peter. Peter nodded, following his master's orders, Nebula still clinging to his back. He tightened his grip on his lightsaber, preparing to face the soldiers as he sprinted towards the danger, his body shooting forward at high speed. He danced through the ranks of Ronan's elite soldiers, his black lightsaber a blur of deadly precision, each swing of his sword deflecting blaster fire, returning the bolts to where they came from. Peter winced as the cries of the wounded filled the air, watching as one after another, his enemies fell, sizzling blaster impacts along their bodies. He was unsure if they were alive or dead, but he wasn't sure he wanted to know. And soon enough, the inevitable moment came when, as Peter closed the distance, he faced a Kree soldier head-on. The soldier, his weapon raised and his intent clear, left Peter with no choice. In a swift, reflexive action, Peter's lightsaber swung, bisecting the soldier in half, his body falling into two pieces, the smell of cooked flesh filling the air. The act, necessary for survival, left a sour taste in Peter's mouth, a feeling of nausea that crept up his throat. It was his first time ending the life of another humanoid, fully aware of their death, and that he was the cause. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on him, even as he continued to fight. The realization that this was no longer a simple skirmish but a fight for their lives crystallized within him. Each soldier he faced now was not just an enemy but a life he had to extinguish to save his own and his companions. But despite the turmoil within him, he pressed on, driven by the need to protect, and to survive. As the last of Ronan's men fell, Peter stood amidst the chaos, his breathing heavy, his lightsaber's glow casting shadows on his haunted face. Peter stared motionless, the aftermath of the battle laid out before him in stark, unforgiving detail. His eyes, wide with the realization of what he had done, flickered from one fallen body to the next. Suddenly, Peter began to hear Nebula's voice, repeating over and over into his ear. Peter. 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 She seemed to have been calling him for a while now. Hey! Peter turned to look over his shoulder. We have to keep moving, she urged, her voice a steady anchor amidst the storm of his emotions. Peter could hear the concern laced within her words, a concern not just for their physical well-being but for her savior as well. With a heavy nod, acknowledging the truth in her words, Peter gathered the remnants of his resolve and made his way to the ship, leaving dozens of scattered corpses in his wake. Inside the ship, he carefully set Nebula down, ensuring her safety above all else. Wait here, he says as he turns to scan the hangar for any remaining threats, his gaze landing on the fierce battle still raging between Yondu and Ronan. The duel was a maelstrom of flashing weapons, with Yondu's lightsaber dancing against the ominous power of Ronan's universal weapon. In a sudden move, Ronan harnessed the might of his hammer, unleashing a concussive blast towards Yondu. Without hesitation, Yondu countered, a jet of his hand sending a wave of force telekinesis to meet the attack, neutralizing it. The two combatants moved with a precision and ferocity that spoke of years of training and battle-hardened resolve. Yondu's lightsaber danced in his hands, while Ronan wielded his hammer with devastating force, its glow illuminating his features with a sinister light. But as the battle wore on, it became clear that Ronan was gaining the upper hand. A vicious swing of his hammer caught Yondu off guard, the force of the blow sending him staggering backward, blood spewing from his mouth. Peter watched, heart pounding, as Ronan pressed his advantage, his attacks growing more aggressive, more relentless. Nebula, stay here, Peter said, determination stealing his voice as he rushed out of the ship. Wait. Nebula's protests followed him, her voice sharp with worry, but Peter's decision was made. He couldn't stand by while his master fought alone. As the blunt end of the universal weapon impacted Yondu's arm with a sickening crack, sending him sprawling to the floor, his lightsaber skidding out of reach, Ronan loomed over the defeated Master Jedi, victorious. A smirk played on Ronan's lips, a dark promise of the end as he raised his hammer for the final blow. This is the price of defiance, Ronan taunted, his voice a chilling echo in the vastness of the hangar. Yondu looked up, his resolve flickering like a flame in a storm as he called upon the Force. The situation seemed dire, a moment frozen in time. Yet, the Jedi Master reached out, and his lightsaber glided smoothly toward his waiting hand. Ronan poised to deliver the fatal strike, the air charged with the imminent threat of death. But before Yondu could grasp his saber, or his enemy's hammer could fully descend, suddenly, a surge of force, powerful and uncontrollable, filled the hangar. It was as if the very air turned into a tidal wave, a manifestation of pure telekinetic energy that came crashing into Ronan with the fury of a tsunami. Caught off guard, Ronan was hurled across the hangar, his body a mere ragdoll in the grasp of the invisible force, until he smashed into the far wall with a bone-jarring impact, drilling through the metal wall. Yondu's eyes widened, turning to see his Padawan standing a few meters away from him, his hand held out. "Still with us, old man?" Peter joked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Need me to find you a cane like Master Yoda's?" Yondu's eyebrow gave a slight twitch as he rose to his feet, his lightsaber materializing in his grasp. "Very funny," he responded with a hint of irritation, even as he detected the genuine concern behind his student's jest. "Arg!" Out of nowhere, Ronan's angry shout echoed across the hangar. Moments later, he emerged from a hole in the wall, his hammer throbbing with energy, eyes burning with hatred as he fixed his glare on Peter. "I think he's mad," Peter remarked, receiving an exasperated glance from his master that clearly meant, "You think?" C31 Peter and Yondu vs Ronan. Ronan, his features twisted in rage, surged forward from the wreckage, his eyes fixed on Peter and Yondu with a fiery intensity. "I had plans for you," he bellowed, his voice echoing menacingly through the hangar. "You were to be my leverage against the Republic, a means to an end. But your insolence has sealed your fate. Now, I shall relish in tearing you apart piece by blood-dripping piece." His hammer, pulsating with a dark energy, seemed to hum with anticipation of the violence to come. Ronan's anger was a palpable aura, charging the atmosphere with a volatile tension. Peter, seemingly unfazed by Ronan's threats, offered a cheeky smile. "That's quite the long hammer you have there. You wouldn't be compensating for something, would you? Because I read on the HoloNet that guys with small, well, you know, they need big toys to make up for what they lack in other areas," he hinted, gesturing down at his crotch. Beside Peter, Yondu's expression shifted to one of mild exasperation as he glanced over at his Padawan. "Remind me to restrict your HoloNet access when we return to the temple." "What? Why?" Peter whined like a child, completely ignoring Ronan, which seemed to only infuriate him even further. "Because you shouldn't be learning such vulgar information," Yondu countered, following Peter's lead, treating Ronan as if he weren't even there. "It could impact your training." "But how am I supposed to watch Lekka 4 play videos on Schwilektees.com?" Peter groaned, naming a very real website, which he may or may not visit on occasion. Ronan's face contorted with rage, his patience snapping like a brittle twig. "Enough of your insolence!" he bellowed, his voice thundering through the air. "Your juvenile mockery and blatant disrespect end here." With a fierce scowl etched deeply into his features, Ronan lunged forward, his movements fueled by a mix of anger and a desire to silence them once and for all. Appearing before the two Jedi, Ronan launched a flurry of strikes with his hammer. The air around them vibrated with the force of each attack. Working together, Peter and Yondu skillfully avoided and blocked, telekinetically halting any concussive blasts before they could reach them. Peter, tapping into his training and the bond he shared with Yondu, found a rhythm as they moved in tandem. He ducked under a sweeping blow from Ronan, spinning to deliver a slash of his lightsaber that grazed the Kree's armor. "Oops, almost got you there," Peter smirked as he dodged Ronan's retaliation, moving just in time to see Yondu send him sliding backward with a telekinetic blast. "Ugh!" Ronan grunts as he catches his balance, his blood boiling. "Insignificant bugs!" Ronan roared in frustration, his assault intensifying, swinging his hammer with such force that it shook the air with each movement. Yondu, recognizing the pattern in Ronan's attacks, waited for the right moment, then parried a particularly vicious strike with his lightsaber, redirecting the energy back towards Ronan. The energy clash produced a blinding explosion, similar to a flashbang, momentarily stunning his opponent. Yondu seized the opportunity, using the force to pull Ronan toward him, creating an opening. "Your anger blinds you, Ronan. It makes you weak," he commented as he swung his sword, aiming to sever the Kree warlord's left arm. Peter commented, circling around to Ronan's back. "Yeah, and it also makes you pretty ugly. You might want to work on that." Still partially blinded, Ronan manages to narrowly evade Yondu's blade, the tip grazing his armor as his eyes readjusted. "Your arrogance will be your downfall," he snarled, regaining his balance. However, before he could fully recover, Peter appeared behind him, a fierce, unforgiving look on his face. With precise movement, Peter swung his lightsaber, cutting through Ronan's left arm like butter. The sudden loss took Ronan by surprise, his eyes widening in shock as he staggered back, his arm clattering to the floor beside him, his hammer still grasped in his remaining right hand. Ronan glared at the two Jedi with a mixture of disbelief and seething hatred, his pride wounded. "You!" he gasped, struggling to maintain his composure. "You have no idea what forces you've just unleashed. The Kree will not forget this insult, nor will I." Peter, twirling his lightsaber with a nonchalant air, couldn't help but retort, "Well, it'll be hard for you to remember much once you're dead. And as for the Kree, Met." He shrugged uncaringly. "They're already a nation at war, and I'm sure once we return to explain how the despicable Ronan the Accuser attacked us unprovoked, peaceful Jedi, the Republic will make that war much harder as well." Ronan grits his teeth, a vein throbbing on his forehead. "Lies. Your words are nothing but slander and lies, crafted to undermine my honor." And he was right. After all, although he wasn't the most agreeable in their meeting, Ronan was not the aggressor in this situation. Peter was the one to throw the first stone, so to speak. "The truth is written by winners, and sadly, it's not looking too good for you." Peter countered, clearly admitting that he would lie. "I mean, forget about winning, I don't think you'll make it out of here alive." Yondu, slightly perturbed by his Padawan's outlook on life, couldn't argue with the logic of it either. He tightened his grip on his sword, glancing over at Peter, signaling that it was time to end this. With a nod, they circled Ronan, who, despite his grievous injury, readied himself for another assault. His eyes burned with a fire that was both terrifying and pitiable. "I will not be defeated by peace-loving monks," Ronan spat, gripping his hammer with his remaining hand, its purple glow brightening by the second. As Ronan lunged forward, his weapon raised for a devastating blow, Peter and Yondu acted in perfect harmony. Peter darted beneath Ronan's guard, a blur of motion, slicing at the warlord's legs and forcing him to kneel. Yondu, materializing at the warmonger's side, stabbed his blade into his right shoulder. "Argh!" Ronan screamed in agony as his flesh was penetrated and cooked from the inside out, dropping his hammer in the process. And with precise control of the force, Peter pulled the universal weapon to himself before it could even touch the floor, catching it in his offhand. "Don't mind if I do," he muttered in awe, admiring his new property. Ronan, now on his knees, looked up at his conquerors, the realization of his imminent demise dawning in his eyes. "You may kill me, but my cause, my purpose will live on. The galaxy will be cleansed through swift and righteous Kree justice," he declared, his voice a hoarse whisper. Peter exchanged a glance with Yondu, a silent agreement passing between them. He couldn't be allowed to live. Too many lives have already been lost because of his malicious actions. If they spared him now, many more would be added to that long list of names. Simply put, the universe would be a much better place without Ronan the Accuser. With a swift, clean motion, they raised their sabers high before bringing them down to decapitate Ronan, his head toppling to the floor, his last words still hanging in the air. Seconds later, the warlord's body fell as well, his head rolled to a stop a few feet away, his face frozen in an expression of fanatical conviction. As the dust settled, Peter and Yondu stood over Ronan's lifeless body, the intensity of the moment slowly fading. Yondu, his stoic expression shifting, turned his attention to his Padawan, a worried look blooming on his face. "Peter," Yondu began, his voice even but layered with a depth of concern, "are you okay?" His eyes, more perceptive than most, had picked up on the slight tremor in his Padawan's hands, a telltale sign of inner turmoil. Suddenly, Peter's jovial, victorious demeanor faltered, a seriousness showing that was as rare as it was alarming. I don't know," he confessed, locking eyes with Yondu. "When I fought those soldiers, it was the first time I've ever taken a life." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "And what bothers me the most is how easy it was, and how easy it became to do it again. I hate that it feels this way, like I could kill another platoon of Kree without batting an eye. They attacked us, and we didn't have a choice, I know that, but..." His voice trailed off, words escaping him. Yondu listened intently, understanding the gravity of Peter's admission. Most Padawans never faced the stark reality of killing, as the Jedi Order has been at relative peace for thousands of years, making Peter's experience a clear deviation from the norm. "What you feel is natural, Peter," Yondu said, offering a reassuring nod. "The path of a Jedi is many, with some trails more difficult to traverse than others. But it is how we tread down these pathways that define us." Before Peter could respond, a sudden commotion broke their solemn reflection. Nebula, her usual stoic facade giving way to a rare burst of emotion, came running toward them. In an impulsive gesture of excitement and relief, she leaped onto Peter's back, embracing him tightly. "You did it! You're alive!" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of happiness and disbelief. She had watched the entire fight from the safety of their ship, her heart in her throat. However, seconds later, realizing her uncharacteristic display of affection, Nebula quickly disengaged, stepping back with an awkward look on her face, doing her best to look anywhere but at Peter. The sudden shift in her behavior left both Peter and Yondu momentarily bemused. "She seems much happier than the Nebula I know," Peter thought with a smile, guessing that Thanos, if he even existed in this universe, hadn't had enough time to completely ruin her yet. Peter, despite the emotional roller coaster of the day, couldn't help but let out a chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. "Yeah, I'm alive," he replied, grinning at Nebula. "Thanks for worrying about me." "Whatever, who said I was worried?" C32 Aftermath. With the battle against Ronan and his soldiers concluded, Peter, Yondu, and Nebula wasted no time in their departure. They knew all too well the risks of lingering. The rest of the fleet orbiting Ronan's flagship might notice the silence from their commander, or a stray soldier on board might send out an alert. The urgency propelled them forward, their steps quick and purposeful. But as they were about to walk off, leaving what was left of Ronan behind, Peter caught a glimpse of an outline in the headless corpse's pocket. Walking over to take a look, he found a small, handheld datapad, which seemed to be password protected. Turning to Yondu, Peter held up the device and asks, "Hey, should we take this with us?" His master nodded, "Sure, the Senate might have a use for it." As they boarded their ship, Peter couldn't help but glance back at the looming battleship. "We could blow the flagship to bits as we fly off," he mused aloud. "It would help give us a smokescreen as we escape." After all, they weren't sure how the rest of the fleet would react to their unannounced departure. Nebula seemed on board, but Yondu, however, shook his head. "That would be senseless slaughter, Peter," he said, his voice firm yet not unkind. "Remember, among even Ronan's soldiers and staff, there could be at least one innocent soul. It is not the Jedi way to kill indiscriminately." Nebula rolled her eyes as she heard this, clearly disagreeing, though she didn't voice it. Peter's shoulders slumped slightly, realization dawning on him. "Yeah, you're right," he conceded, the thrill of battle fading to leave room for reflection. "I guess I got a little carried away." And luckily, as their ship quietly slipped out of the hangar, the vast expanse of space appearing before them, not a single Kree ship opened fire, allowing them to fly off without any issues. The hum of the Jedi ship filled the silent void as it sped through the vibrant tunnels of hyperspace, heading back to Coruscant. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken tension, the remnants of the day's events weighing heavily on its occupants. Peter sat alone by the window, his gaze lost in the hypnotic swirls of hyperspace. His Walkman lay in his lap, its headphones clinging to his ears, the melody drowning out the world around him, but his mind was far from the music. Police Cars Revolving Light play Knockin' on Heaven's Door by Guns N' Roses. Police Cars Revolving Light, A/N, yes, I know this song wasn't on his mixtapes in the movies, but the time period works so I'm adding it. Mama, take this badge from me. I can't use it anymore. It's getting dark, too dark to see. Feels like I'm knocking on heaven's door. Knock knock 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 knocking on heaven's door. Beside Peter leaned the universal weapon, a trophy from his battle against Ronan the Accuser. Today, he had crossed a line he knew he would have to step over sooner or later, taking lives in the heat of battle. The faces of the people he killed, though they were trying to kill him first, flickered in his mind like ghostly apparitions. Yet, guilt remained a stranger to him. Was it the justification of self-defense that numbed his conscience, or was he losing a part of himself, desensitized by the harsh reality of it all? Peter didn't know. Across the room, Master Yondu sat in silent meditation, replaying the final moments with Ronan, questioning the morality of their actions. The Jedi Code was his guiding light, yet he may have broken it today. Had they acted in true defense when they killed Ronan, or had they become executioners in the name of the greater good? The answer was clear. They could have captured Ronan, as he was already disarmed and defeated, but instead, they decided to kill him, to spare the galaxy from any future massacres or genocides spurred on by the Kree Empire's most radical zealot. The conflict between his beliefs and the harsh realities of their previous situation gnawed at him, a storm brewing in the calm of his meditation. Caught between these two introspective individuals, Nebula found herself sitting at a table in the center of the room, her gaze shifting between Peter and Yondu, feeling out of place. She couldn't shake off the feeling of responsibility for the day's bloodshed. After all, if not for her, Peter might have avoided the confrontation with Ronan entirely. They had plunged into the heart of danger to save her, and the cost of that decision was in front of her now. The desire to break the silence was overwhelming, yet she hesitated, unsure if her words could fix anything. Soon enough, the oppressive atmosphere began to shift as Peter, seemingly reaching an acceptance of the day's grim events, pulled himself from the depth of his thoughts. A pragmatic resignation took hold, acknowledging the galaxy's perils and the likelihood of facing such situations once again. That's just how this universe works, he mused silently, the acceptance of this reality clearing the fog of his mind. Stashing his Walkman away, his gaze landed on Nebula, her features edged with discomfort. Moving towards her, he took a seat across the table, prompting an unexpected apology from her. "I'm sorry." "What? Why?" Peter asked, genuinely puzzled. Nebula hesitated, then shared her earlier thoughts, her voice tinged with guilt and sorrow. Peter, in his characteristic manner, shrugged off the gravity of her words. Ronan needed killing anyway, he reassured her, his tone light but sincere. "Truthfully, if I could go back, I'd do it all over again. Including saving you, so don't worry about it, okay?" The warmth in Peter's words touched Nebula, a rare gesture of kindness that felt alien yet comforting. Curious, Peter continued his questions. "Hey, you okay? I mean, how did you end up in this mess anyway?" Nebula's gaze shifted, a flicker of pain in her eyes before she responded, "I was just, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Flying through space when Ronan's fleet decided I was their next target." Peter nodded, unsure if she was telling the truth or not, but ultimately choosing not to pry. After a moment, he ventured another question, treading cautiously. "Do you have any family? Anyone we can contact for you?" Her reaction was immediate and telling, she stiffened, the mention of family conjuring shadows in her eyes. For a brief moment, she seemed to retreat within herself, a fortress of solitude against painful memories. Until finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, there's no one." Peter caught the undercurrent of sorrow in her words and decided not to delve deeper. "Okay, I get it. We all have things we'd rather leave behind or not talk about." His tone was understanding, offering her a silent promise not to broach the subject again. "So, what will you do now?" Peter finally asked, concern lacing his voice. "I don't know," Nebula admitted, the uncertainty of her future a looming specter. Peter, empathetic to her plight, lamented his inability to offer more help, as he's only a penniless Jedi Padawan, without a single cent to his name. He couldn't even house her if he wanted to, as the Jedi would have to agree to take her. Yet, as he witnessed the frown of contemplation on Nebula's face, he made a silent vow to seek Master Yoda's assistance, hoping the Jedi could help Nebula in some form. Coruscant. As their ship descended into the atmosphere, headed toward the Jedi Temple, Peter couldn't help but feel at ease. He hadn't realized until now, but he slowly began to consider the temple, and Coruscant itself as his home. They landed smoothly in the designated area, the hum of the engines quieting to a gentle purr. As the ramp descended, they were immediately greeted by Supreme Chancellor Finus Valorum and the venerable Jedi Grand Master Yoda. Nebula, a stranger to such dignified company, followed closely behind, her eyes scanning her surroundings with wary curiosity. Peter recognized Chancellor Valorum, the very one Palpatine would have deposed to seize control of the Republic, making him wonder what old Sidious was up to right now. "Hopefully, the Council has made good use of my warning," he thought before quickly refocusing on the present. They were ushered into the Jedi Temple, winding through its grand corridors until they reached the Council room. Nebula, not being a Jedi or a government official, was asked to wait outside, a request she complied with silently, albeit with a noticeable edge of discomfort. Inside the Council room, the atmosphere was solemn. Valorum, Yoda, and the rest of the Council listened intently as Yondu began the briefing, handing over Ronan's datapad as he spoke. They detailed everything, from their initial meeting with Nova Prime and everything they learned about the war, to the pointless meeting with Ronan the Accuser and his subsequent death. Peter felt all eyes on him as he admitted his part in the mission's rather violent deviation. He knew Yondu wouldn't cover for him, nor did he expect him to, so the only choice was to be truthful. As expected, some council members' expressions darkened upon hearing Peter's explanation. Sensing their judgment, Peter couldn't stay silent. "May I speak freely?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity. Yoda nodded. "Speak, you may." Peter stood, his gaze sweeping the council members. "I know some of you are disappointed in me, and I'm prepared to accept any punishment. But saving Nebula was the right thing to do. If that means I jeopardized a mission that was already doomed to fail from the beginning, then so be it. I believe in doing what's right, even when it's hard. If that's not what being a true Jedi is about, then maybe it's the Council's vision that needs re-evaluation, not my actions." The room fell silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. Yoda's eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement, or perhaps it was respect. The rest of the Council exchanged looks, their earlier disapproval now mixed with contemplation. Chancellor Valorum nodded thoughtfully as Peter concluded his heartfelt speech. "While we tread in times of uncertainty," Valorum began, addressing the Council, "let's not be so quick to judge those who act with valor and conviction. The death of Ronan the Accuser, though regrettable, opens a pathway to friendship with the Nova Empire, a friendship I was already working towards, actually." His words set the room abuzz. A few Jedi, steeped in tradition and the moral absolutes of the Jedi Code, raised their voices in dissent. "But this changes nothing. Either way, the rules have been broken," one council member challenged, sparking a fervent exchange of perspectives. As the debate waged, Peter watched, his fate hanging in the balance. The minutes stretched into what seemed an eternity until a consensus was reached. Yoda, having listened intently to all sides, finally spoke. "Teach the Bear Clan's dueling class for a month, you will," he decreed, a twinkle in his eye. "Severe, this punishment is not. Yet, reflect on your actions, you must." Relief washed over Peter, a smile creeping onto his face. But before he could leave, he turned back, one final request burning within him. "Master Yoda, there's something else. Nebula, she's got no family, nowhere to go. Can the Jedi offer her a place to stay, at least until she figures things out?" The room tensed, ready to rebuke, but Yoda raised his hand, silencing any opposition. "Stay in the temple, she may. A place of learning and healing, the Jedi Temple is." Gratitude filled Peter's voice as he thanked Yoda. Exiting the council room, he found Nebula, her posture tense from the unfamiliar environment. "Got some good news," he said, his smile broad and genuine. "You're welcome to stay at the temple for a while. Figure things out, and get some rest. You're safe here." Nebula's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and relief washing over her, as she thought she might have to sleep on the streets tonight. Suddenly, a faint smile touched her lips, a sign that, perhaps, her fortunes were about to change. As Peter was helping Nebula settle into her new quarters within the Jedi Temple, the intense discussions within the council chamber had finally begun to wane. The Jedi Council, after much debate, was still torn on the righteousness of his and Yondu's actions during their recent mission. Like always, the council remained split. Some believed they did a good thing, while others believed the Jedi Code, as well as the directive of their mission, had been broken. With a heavy sigh, Yoda called the meeting to an end. The members, one by one, filed out of the room, leaving behind a silence that felt almost oppressive. Yondu, however, lingered, his gaze following Yoda. As the room emptied, his voice cut through the silence, "Master Yoda." Yoda paused, turning to face Yondu. The gravity of Yondu's expression did not escape him. "Bothered, you are? Speak, you should." Yondu took a step forward, his posture rigid, the reflection of a man burdened with unspoken fears. "It concerns our Padawan," he initiated, his tone laden with a deep sense of worry. "I hesitated to bring this matter before the council, not wanting to stir unrest without necessity." The air between them grew thick with foreboding, as Yondu continued, "Peter's behavior during, and especially after our mission, has raised some alarms in me." C-33 The Black Order. The corridors of the Jedi Temple echoed with the remnants of the day's heated discussions, yet within the council chambers, a more solemn exchange unfolded between two of its most revered members. Yoda's expression remained unreadable, yet his eyes narrowed slightly, a glimmer of concern passing through them. "Concerned, we should be. Indeed," Mace Windu began, "Peter's actions during our recent mission, they've given me pause." The room seemed to close in as he recounted the events, the weight of his words hanging heavily between them. "His recklessness, his inability to heed my guidance, his unsettling enthusiasm for combat, not to mention the fact that he seems to be searching for his home planet. It's all so troubling, especially his condition after our mission had ended. After the mission, how did he fare, Yoda asked. Yondu sighed. The aftermath hit him hard. Not because he regretted the fighting, on the contrary, his excitement was palpable, which is alarming in itself. But realizing the gravity of his actions, taking lives for the first time, and not just one but many, and his role in Ronan's death, I believe it's left a mark. The gravity of the revelation hung in the air, a shadow casting over Yoda's wise features. Troubling, this is. Early in a Jedi's path, such experiences can deeply affect their trajectory. Yondu nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. I chose to withhold these observations from the Council. I feared it would only sow discord between them and Peter. If he is indeed the chosen one, having the Council against him would serve no purpose. It falls to us, as his mentors, to guide him through this, and back onto the path of the light. The silence that followed was telling, both masters lost in their thoughts on the delicate balance of nurturing their shared Padawan. Believe you, that towards the dark side, he might be headed? Yoda's voice was soft, yet it cut through the tension with the precision of a lightsaber. Not yet, Yondu admitted, the uncertainty of the future a heavy burden. But the seeds are there, and if we're not careful, they could grow. We must be vigilant, guiding him with a subtlety that does not push him away but gently steers him back. Yoda nodded, his eyes closing as if to peer into the vastness of the Force itself. A fine line, it is, we walk. Ensure that we must, Peter does not stray further. Guide him with wisdom and compassion, we shall. And on that note, their conversation drew to a close with the understanding that the path ahead would require patience, wisdom, and perhaps most importantly, faith in the Force. As Yondu left the council room, leaving a pensive and thoughtful Yoda behind, the weight of their shared responsibility was at the forefront of their minds. The future was uncertain, but they would do their best to steer it in a positive direction, ensuring Peter didn't fall down a path of darkness. Not long after Yondu and Yoda's talk concluded, Peter bid farewell to Nebula for the night, leaving her in one of the many guest quarters in the Jedi Temple, and navigated through the empty corridors, on his way to a certain secluded meditation room. Ensuring no one was following, he activated the secret mechanism in the room, descending into the hidden basement below. As he walked into the huge, open chamber, the spectral figure of Darth Revan awaited at the top of the purified Sith shrine. The shrine crackled with power as Peter climbed to the top, greeting his master. "Hey, I'm back," Peter announced, a joking smirk masking his face, holding up his new hammer. "Like my new toy? I had to kill a few dozen guys to get it." Darth Revan, ignoring the weapon completely, read through Peter's smiling facade. "Is this to be considered unfortunate?" he asked, clearly unbothered by the killing. "Tell me, what burdens your mind, my foolish apprentice?" "It's not necessarily a bad thing." Peter recounted the events of his mission, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of conflict. He spoke of the battle, the lives he had taken, and the turbulent emotions that followed, as well as his later acceptance of it all. As Revan listened, his ghostly visage remained impassive. Yet, when Peter finished, Revan's response was measured, his tone imbued with the weight of centuries. "Killing is an inescapable facet of existence, Peter, especially for the Sith," Revan's voice resonated throughout the chamber. "Whether in times of peace or conflict, be it as a Jedi, a Sith, or simply someone defending what they hold dear, one must be ready to take lives. It's not the act itself that shapes you, but the intent that drives it. Embrace it as a necessary deed, and carry on." Peter listened intently, the words striking a chord within him. "Yeah, that's sort of the conclusion I came to as well." In a moment of reflection, Revan then imparted, "Moreover, remember those fools sought your demise first, which sealed their fate from the start. They should consider themselves fortunate it wasn't I, or another Sith, for had it been, their end would not have come so gently. Believe me, the quick demise you granted them was an act of mercy. Because even for us Sith, justice served in defense of your own life is nothing if not righteous." Revan's perspective was starkly different from that of his Jedi mentors, yet it carried an undeniable truth. The galaxy was not black and white, and neither were the decisions he would have to make. The more he thought of it, the more Peter found himself agreeing more and more with that sentiment, minus the small bit about torture, of course. "Your journey requires balance, Peter. You've chosen to walk your own path, learning from the Jedi and the Sith to mold your own identity, and I respect that. Yet that also means you'll have to find your own way in situations like these. I can give you all the counseling in the world, but it's up to you to interpret it as you will. Embrace the complexities of your nature, and let neither side of the force dominate. The lesson was clear, and as Ravan's form faded away, leaving Peter alone in silence to contemplate his advice, a final sense of resolve settled over him. He understood now that his path was his own to forge, a balance between light and dark, life and death. Oh, and I'll be taking this for study. Ravan appeared again, snatching the universal weapon from Peter's grasp before disappearing again, the hammer vanishing with him. Peter sighed, though a part of him expected this. After all, his master did the same thing when he first got his lightsaber. As he made his way back to the surface, the temple around him seemed different, as if acknowledging the burden and the power of the balance he strived to maintain. And in the quiet of the night, as he lay in bed, his headphones playing one of his mother's favorite songs, Peter felt the weight of his previous mission slowly lift away, his lingering uncertainty vanishing completely. Police Cars Revolving Light play Goodbye Stranger by Supertrap. Police Cars Revolving Light, A/N, this is one of my favorite songs. It was an early morning yesterday. I was up before the dawn. And I really have enjoyed my stay. But I must be moving on. Like a king without a castle. Like a queen without a throne. I'm an early morning lover. And I must be moving on. Now I believe in what you say. Is the undisputed truth. But I have to have things my own way. To keep me in my youth. Like a ship without an anchor. Like a slave without a chain. Just the thought of those sweet ladies sends a shiver through my veins. And I will go on shining. Shining like brand new. I'll never look behind me. My troubles will be few. A week had passed since the demise of Ronan the Accuser, and the galaxy found itself on the cusp of a shifting paradigm. The Galactic Republic, traditionally neutral and without a standing army, had cast its lot with the Nova Empire. Though the Senate sent no troops, its policies strictly forbidding it the assistance it provided in the form of things like weapons and ships at reduced costs, and strategic intelligence marked a significant turn in the tide against the aggressive Kree Empire. Peter, back at the Jedi Temple, found himself reading on his datapad, scheming through the most recent string of information warfare between the Republic and the Kree Empire. The datapad he and Master Yondu had taken from Ronan was now a weapon in the Republic's arsenal. Cracked open by the finest slicers, its logs revealed the extensive war crimes committed by Ronan, laying bare the brutalities of the Kree Empire for the entire galaxy to see on the holonet. The Kree's image was tarnished, their moral high ground eroded by the revelations of their own viciousness. But the Kree were not a people to take such slights lying down. In retaliation, they launched their own salvo in this war of information. Footage from Ronan's ship surfaced, depicting Peter and Yondu's actions in a light most unfavorable. The narrative spun by the Kree painted the Jedi as aggressors who attacked unprovoked, executed Ronan and his men in cold blood, and desecrated the dead by looting the universal weapon and the datapad, demanding they be returned immediately. But the demands for their return rang hollow. These were spoils of war, and the Kree, now declared enemies of the Republic, had no claim over them in the eyes of the Republic or its allies. Peter, lounging in his quarters, couldn't help but smirk at the absurdity of the situation. Not giving it back, that's for sure, he muttered to himself, eyeing the universal weapon propped against his wall. My precious! He thought, jokingly. The Jedi Council, for their part, remained silent on the matter. The murky waters of war were not their usual arena. Yet, the involvement of two of their own had sparked some debate. Whispered discussions filled the corridors of the temple, a mixture of concern, disapproval, and in some cases, quiet admiration for the daring actions of Peter and his master. In this war of information, Peter found himself in the eye of the storm, though it didn't seem to bother him much. I'll just keep doing my thing. Let them say whatever they want. In the distant reaches of wild space, where the stars themselves seemed to be shrouded in darkness, Thanos, the Mad Titan, sat upon his throne. Around him knelt his children, Ebony Maw, his voice as silken as it was deceitful, Cull Obsidian, a mountain of muscle and malice, Proxima Midnight, swift and lethal with her spear, Corvus Glaive, his figure tall and imposing. Insert pictures of the Black Order here, A/N, do you guys want Supergiant in this story as well? She wasn't in the movies because she's overpowered though. And lastly, the youngest, Gamera, her frame small and battered due to the brutal tutelage she's been forced to endure since losing her usual sparring partner. A holographic screen above them flickered, playing the video released by the Kree Empire, the visage of Nebula, Thanos' runaway daughter, coming into focus. Gamera, her features twisted in a frown, bore witness to the sister she hadn't seen in over a week, the sister who, in her eyes, had committed the unfathomable sin of fleeing their father's dominion, a sin she'd contemplated committing as well, but never had the courage. Thanos, his gaze fixed on the hologram, watched with an unreadable expression as the two mysterious Jedi executed Ronan the Accuser. His interest piqued not by the act itself, but by the unmistakable sight of Nebula rushing over and embracing one of the Jedi with what could only be described as relief and joy. The hologram vanished, and Ebony Maw stepped forward, his voice a whisper that filled the room. "My lord, shall we retrieve our wayward sibling?" Thanos sat in silence, contemplating the request before finally answering. "Yes, send Corvus and Proxima." Before they could leave, Gamera spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Father, may I? May I go with them? It was my fault Nebula left. I wish to bring her back myself." Thanos raised a brow, his gaze shifting towards Gamera, noticing the bruises and wounds that marred her otherwise green complexion. With Nebula gone, Gamera had been pitted against Proxima, a battle she was destined to lose from the start. Proxima and Corvus exchanged looks, their disdain for the idea clear. Yet, all eyes were on Thanos, awaiting his decree. After a moment that stretched like an eternity, Thanos nodded. "Yes, Gamera. You may accompany them. Perhaps, in doing so, Nebula will return with less resistance." Proxima and Corvus begrudgingly accepted the decision, though their expressions spoke volumes of their doubts. As they prepared to depart, Thanos' voice echoed throughout the chamber, a commandment that left no room for failure. "Bring her back. And if she resists, remind her of her place in this universe." C34 Hidden Agendas. The days at the Jedi Temple flowed with the gentle rhythm of discipline and learning, but for Peter Quill, they held a restless energy. The whispers in the hallways were easy to ignore, but what wasn't was the changed demeanor of his Jedi masters, Yoda and Mace Windu. Their extra attention and advice, meant as guidance, began to feel more like pestering, a fact Peter couldn't help but notice. "They must be worried about me after the last mission," he concluded, both annoyed and touched by their concerns. During a particularly grueling training session, Peter meditated with dozens of rocks and boulders levitating around him, his focus beginning to waver, not from the physical exertion but from the barrage of wisdom Yoda offered. In stillness, the force is most felt. "Quiet your mind, you must," Yoda instructed for what seemed like the 100th time that hour. Peter, drenched in sweat and exhaustion, barely suppressed an eye roll. While he respected and appreciated his master's concern, the constant coddling was starting to grate on him. It was at this moment that Nebula entered, her curiosity about the temple leading her to the training hall. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, catching sight of Peter's drained expression, Yoda's attentive stance beside him, and the wondrous sight of the floating rocks and boulders. "Worry not. Finished we are," Yoda said, turning towards her with a gentle nod. "How find you the temple?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that belied the depth of his scrutiny. "It's peaceful," Nebula replied, her voice softer than usual, a stark contrast to the prickly exterior she typically presented. "Much more peaceful than I'm used to." Yoda smiles, masking the pity and sadness he felt for the girl before him. Her cybernetic enhancements and guarded behavior spoke far more than any words could. "Lived a hard life, she has." Peter wiped the sweat from his brow as he carefully lowered everything to the ground, watching as Yoda exchanged a few more words with Nebula before departing, leaving to take care of some council business. "So, how's the exploring going?" Peter walked over and asked. "It's different here, calming," Nebula admitted, her eyes scanning the training hall, seeing it for the first time. "What about you? Does all this," she gestured to the training equipment, "get tiring?" Peter laughed. "You have no idea. But it's not just the physical stuff, it's the mentorship," he said, air quoting the last word, "that's been a bit much lately." Nebula nodded, understanding the unspoken strain behind his words. As they began to walk back to the residential area, she hesitated before asking, "Peter, what do you think I should do next? Do you think they'll let me stay here?" Peter considered her question carefully. "Well, if it were up to me, I'd say you should stay as long as you like. But the Jedi, they're kind folks so they won't throw you into the streets, but I'm not sure they'd let you hang around without a purpose." Nebula's face fell slightly. "So, what? I'll end up in some orphanage?" "Maybe. I don't know," Peter shrugged, an idea coming to mind. But hey, if you're interested, why not ask for some training? I mean, becoming a Jedi might be a long shot, especially with your age and all, but if you're working hard, I doubt they'd find it so easy to send you away. Nebula mulled over his words, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. Yeah, they can't ship me off to some orphanage if I'm a Jedi, right? Peter hesitantly nodded, yeah, just don't get your hopes up, okay? I was 9 when I joined the Jedi, and they still gave me a hard time about it. But there's no harm in trying, right? If you're serious about this, then Grandmaster Yoda's the one to talk to. He's the most understanding out of everyone. As they reached Peter's quarters, the conversation came to a natural pause. Thanks, Peter. I'll talk to Yoda, Nebula said, her usual tough exterior softened by the possibility of a future she hadn't considered before. Peter smiled, anytime, Nebula. Just remember, don't get your hopes up too high. He warned, the Jedi are pretty strict, and we're not even sure if you can use the Force yet. With a determined, yet cautious nod, Nebula walked off, leaving Peter alone with his thoughts. I just hope I gave her the right advice. He sighed, heading to his room for a much-needed shower. While Peter was dealing with the fallout of his first mission, and Nebula set her sights on the possibility of becoming a Jedi, a sinister plot unfolded far from the Republic. In the heart of the Kree homeworld, Hala, Darth Sidious, the shadowy puppeteer, wove his latest scheme. Sidious stood at the window of his opulent mansion, overlooking the sprawling cityscape of Hala. The Kree world was a blend of ancient traditions and cutting-edge technology, a perfect hiding place for someone like him. After his plans in the Galactic Republic crumbled, he sought a fresh start alongside a new identity. And Hala, with its internal strife and political unrest, provided the fertile ground he needed. Although only a few months have passed, Sidious has already begun laying the groundwork, rising to power slowly but surely. In his first week on Hala, he was able to find a perfect foothold into Kree politics, the House of Fiero, a new and growing political faction composed of wealthy and powerful merchants from across the Kree Empire. His choice to join the House of Fiero was born out of convenience and shared ambition. The faction's opposition to the Supreme Intelligence, the artificial ruler of the Kree Empire, aligned with Sidious's plans. The AI's cold, logical rule had long been a thorn in the side of many Kree, and Sidious intended to use that to his benefit. Turning his back from the window, Sidious walked down the hall and entered a dimly lit room, where notable members of the House of Fiero gathered around a large, holographic map of the Kree Empire. The room buzzed with whispers of coup and rebellion. Friends, Sidious began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, the galaxy is changing. The Republic's alliance with the Nova Empire and their dissemination of Ronan's atrocities have only fueled our people's desire for change. Like a chameleon, he adopted the Kree as his own people as if he were merely changing his clothes. The Supreme Intelligence's reign is waning to an end. It's time for the Kree to be led by living beings once again. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. The members of the House of Fiero were ambitious, to say the least. Corrupted by power, wealth, and greed, they saw the chaos of war as an opportunity to seize control. And with Sidious's guidance, their path to power seemed all but assured. But let us not forget, Sidious continued, the populace is behind us because they yearn for peace. We must be the harbingers of that peace, at least in their eyes. Once we control the Empire, the real work begins. The members nodded, their minds racing with thoughts of power and dominance. Sidious, however, had plans within plans. The House of Fiero was but a means to an end, a stepping stone to his ultimate goal of reshaping the Kree Empire into a new Sith Empire. As for the Supreme Intelligence, Sidious mused, it is but a relic of the past. A tool that has outlived its usefulness. We will offer the Kree people freedom from its rule. And in its place, they shall have us as their ruling body, the House of Fiero. The room erupted in applause, the members incited by Sidious's words, like sweet whispers empowered by the dark side itself. They viewed themselves as liberators, yet in reality, they were merely tyrants consumed by their own thirst for power. Sidious smiled, his gaze returning to the holographic map. The pieces were moving according to his design. The Kree, tired of endless war, were ripe for manipulation. And with the House of Fiero under his influence, it was only a matter of time before his plans came to fruition. And as the meeting drew to a close, Sidious retired to his private chambers, his mind already on the next phase of his grand scheme. The fall of the Supreme Intelligence and the rise of the House of Fiero were but the beginning. In the shadows, the Sith Empire would rise anew, with Sidious at its helm. As Darth Sidious laid the groundwork for his empire on Hala, another dark figure moved pieces across the chessboard of the Galactic Republic. Darth Plagueis, the Sith Lord shrouded in secrecy, had faced setbacks, but none so severe that they could extinguish the dark flame of his ambition. The loss of Sidious as a pawn had been a blow, but in the aftermath, he found an asset of unparalleled value: Count Dooku. Dooku, a former Jedi of noble birth and considerable power, had become Plagueis' apprentice. His loyalty, whether born of manipulation or genuine belief in the Sith philosophy, was unwavering. And this loyalty was crucial for Plagueis' future plans. His failed attempts to transfer his consciousness into a human body to infiltrate the highest office in the Republic had been a setback, yet it had not deterred him. If anything, it had sharpened his focus on the need for a trusted apprentice to operate in the political arena, a role Dooku was born to play. Today, Plagueis' eyes were glued to a live broadcast from the Senate, where Dooku was about to make a speech that would mark the beginning of their new strategy. In the Senate chamber, Dooku stood tall, his voice resonating through the Grand Hall. "Esteemed Senators, I come before you today to question our Republic's involvement in the Kree Nova War," he began, his words carefully chosen to sow seeds of doubt and discontent. "Our great Republic has always been a beacon of peace and democracy, yet we find ourselves embroiled in a conflict not our own." Furthermore, Dooku's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with senators from various systems, ensuring his message was felt personally by each. "We must confront the Bantha in the chamber, the rampant corruption and stagnation that plagues our Republic. How long have we sat idly by, as bureaucracy and corruption erode the very foundations of our democracy?" A heavy silence fell over the chamber, the uncomfortable truth of his words settling in the hearts of many present. "Look around you," he continued, his voice rising, "at the countless representatives more interested in lining their pockets than serving the common good. This war," he gestured emphatically, "is but another example of their greed." Dooku paused, allowing his words to permeate the thick atmosphere of the Senate. "The Kree Nova conflict has diverted our attention and resources away from addressing the urgent needs of our own citizens. While we meddle in external affairs, collecting profit off war and death, our people suffer from poverty, starvation, inequality, and neglect." The senators, once murmuring among themselves, now sat in rapt attention, some visibly uncomfortable, others nodding in reluctant agreement. Dooku had touched a nerve, calling out the unspoken truth of their collective failure. "It's time for change," Dooku declared, his voice firm and resolute. "Time to return to the principles upon which the Republic was founded. We must cleanse the rot from within our ranks, streamline our processes, and refocus on the core values of justice, peace, and democracy. Only then can we truly say we serve the will of the people." Whispers filled the chamber, some in agreement, others in dissent. Dooku's confidence was unshaken as he continued, "Moreover, the actions of our own Jedi, specifically Master Yondu and his Padawan learner, have raised grave concerns. Their involvement in the demise of Ronan the Accuser, though celebrated by many, must be scrutinized. Was their act not one of aggression, unprovoked and unjustified by the standards of the Jedi Order?" The chamber erupted into a riot of voices, the controversy Dooku had ignited spreading like wildfire. Senators debated among themselves, the implications of his words not lost on them. The Jedi's role, always meant to be peacekeepers, was now cast into doubt by one of their own. Meanwhile, Darth Plagueis watched, a thin smile creeping across his face. Dooku's performance was more than satisfactory, it was a masterstroke. By questioning the Jedi's actions and the Republic's corruption and stagnation, Dooku had begun to pave his path to political influence, a path that Plagueis intended to exploit to the fullest. Plagueis' plans required patience, subtlety, and a keen understanding of the dark side's ability to manipulate events from behind the scenes. Dooku was his voice in the Senate, a harbinger of dissent that would, in time, allow the Sith to control the Republic from within. As the broadcast ended, Plagueis turned away, his thoughts already on the next phase of his plan. The galaxy was aboard, and every piece was moving according to his will. The Jedi, the Senate, and even his runaway pawn Sidious, were but players in a game they had yet to fully comprehend. As Count Dooku finished his grand speech, three figures stood before a large hollow screen, their expressions a mix of concern, offense, and confusion. Yoda stroked his chin thoughtfully, his eyes narrowed as he pondered the implications of the speech they had just witnessed. Mace Windu's brow was furrowed, his stance rigid with indignation at the audacity of Count Dooku's words, even if he did agree with a good portion of what was said. And then there was Peter, who watched with a perplexed look on his face, trying to piece together the unfolding events. Peter's mind raced. Dooku's speech was stirring, incendiary, and not at all what Peter remembered from any Star Wars movies he'd seen. I think he does give a speech, but that doesn't happen until the Clone Wars. And at that point, he was already a Sith. He wondered silently if Dooku had already fallen to the dark side. Peter began to fully understand that the timeline or perhaps the very fabric of this universe was altered by the melding of the Marvel and Star Wars universes. He sighed as he realized that his future knowledge might not be as reliable as he expected it to be. As the broadcast concluded, Yoda turned away from the screen, his gait slow and contemplative. "Worrying, this development is," he murmured. "A meeting with Count Dooku, I have. Speak to him, I will." Peter's interest piqued. Here was his chance to see Dooku in person, to gauge for himself whether the man was indeed a Sith. "Mind if I join you, Master Yoda? I'd like to meet the man who called me out live on the holonet," Peter asked, his request laced with genuine curiosity. Yoda paused, peering up at Peter for a moment. "Accompany me, you may," he finally consented. Yondu, still visibly annoyed, chose not to join them. "I have matters here that require my attention," he stated firmly, clearly not interested in seeing Dooku. As Yoda and Peter stepped out of the temple, the bustling atmosphere of Coruscant greeted them. The city planet's endless skyscrapers bathed in the twilight of the setting sun, casting long shadows over the streets below. Standing at the front gate of the Jedi Temple, they waited in silence, the air thick with anticipation. As they awaited Dooku's arrival, the serene skyline of Coruscant was interrupted by the descent of an unfamiliar ship. Its design was foreign, insectoid, aggressive, unmistakably Chitauri. Inside, Gamera stared out of the window, her gaze fixed on the planet below. The determination in her eyes was as sharp as the edge of a knife, awaiting the moment when she would see her sister again. Behind her, Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight exchanged looks of dark amusement, their sadistic smiles hinting at the chaos they intended to unleash. C-35 attack on the Jedi Temple. Nebula, the fierce daughter of Thanos, the Mad Titan, now a prospective Jedi apprentice, stood silently in the corner of the Bear Clan's training hall, her eyes tracking the movements of the younglings with intense focus. She mimicked each graceful motion and controlled stance with precision, her unwavering resolve causing her to learn at an astounding speed. The younglings, too caught up in their own studies and training to notice her, continued their practice, their laughter and chatter filling the air with innocence and joy. It's been exactly 2 days since Nebula practically begged to join the Jedi Order. Her request, though filled with desperation, had been met with a kindness she was unaccustomed to. When she stopped Grandmaster Yoda in the halls, asking if she could become a Jedi, or at the very least learn from them as a normal person, he didn't outright dismiss her plea. Instead, he had offered a sliver of hope, a chance that was as fragile as it was precious. The promise of testing her midi-chlorian count and the possibility of advocating for her in the Jedi Council had lit a fire within her. She knew the odds were stacked against her, as even Yoda warned of the slim chances she had, yet she clung to hope as if it were a lifeline. As she stood there, mimicking the younglings' every move and absorbing everything the teachers said, her mind was not on the techniques or the force, but on the looming specter of the Council's judgment. Would her efforts be enough? Could she truly belong to this world of peace and happiness? Will they accept me? She wondered when, suddenly, her musings were abruptly shattered by a deafening explosion. Boom! The ground beneath her feet trembled, as shockwaves tore through the temple. Panic ensued as the younglings stumbled, their laughter replaced by cries of confusion and fear. With her heart racing, Nebula scanned her surroundings, looking for the source of the disturbance, her instincts kicking into overdrive. The Jedi teachers, once gentle instructors, transformed in an instant. Lightsabers appeared in their hands and ignited, casting an eerie glow across their determined figures. The room, filled with the sound of humming blades, became a fortress, with each Jedi ready to protect the younglings, their gazes all turning in the same direction, the front of the temple. Unarmed, Nebula felt a familiar dread creeping into her heart. The peace of the Jedi Temple, her newfound sanctuary, was under threat. Rushing out of the room, and toward the sound of the explosion, she hoped it wasn't who she thought it was. Moments earlier, outside the temple, Count Dooku, a figure of elegance and authority, appeared on the horizon. His approach to the Jedi Temple was measured, his presence alone commanding attention. Standing beside Master Yoda, Peter watched intently, curious about the man whose words had stirred the Senate and the galaxy into a frenzy. As Dooku neared, his gaze fell upon Yoda, and he bowed slightly, a gesture of respect. Master Yoda, he greeted with a reverence that contradicted his recent provocations. His attention then shifted to Peter, a spark of recognition in his eyes. Ah, the young Jedi from the Holonet. Your actions have caused quite the stir. Peter, maintaining his usual laid-back demeanor, offered a hand and a grin. Peter Quill, unprovoked Kree murderer, as you so eloquently put it during your speech. Dooku's smile faltered for a split second before returning. Count Dooku. Yoda watched the tense moment in amusement before finally speaking. Impressive, your speech was. Agree with your points on the Republic, I do. Well, I appreciate your support. Dooku seemed happy to hear this, turning his attention toward Yoda and away from Peter, doing his best to ignore his presence altogether. Peter smirked as he saw this. I need to keep pushing his buttons, he thought, hoping to assess Dooku's emotions by provoking him. But, agree with your statement about the Jedi, I do not. Yoda continues, causing Dooku to frown. I knew you wouldn't. He replied. Your concerns, valid, they are, Yoda added, even so, believe your views on the Jedi to be overly harsh, I do. Well-meaning, in their own ways, most Jedi are. Dooku's expression hardened. With all due respect, Master Yoda, nothing you say will change my mind on this. He explained, the Order's rigidity and adherence to outdated principles have caused nothing but harm to both themselves and the galaxy as a whole. Peter, sensing the tension, saw his chance. Isn't it a bit much to blame the Jedi for everything wrong in the galaxy? I mean, I agree that they have their problems, but they aren't the government. It's the Republic that makes the real decisions that could cause entire solar systems to either thrive or die out. Dooku's eyes narrowed at Peter's words. And what would you know of such matters, Padawan Quill? Peter leaned in, his every word empowered by a small sliver of the Force, prodding Dooku over and over. Well, for one, I've been here. Can you say the same? No, you can't, can you? After all, you ran away from the Order like a disgruntled child. What happened? Did Daddy Yoda not give you enough love and affection? Yoda glanced at Peter, puzzled by his confrontational tone, something uncharacteristic of him. Peter continued, noticing a twitch in Dooku's eyebrow as he spoke, tell me, what are the Jedi guilty of exactly? You know what? Why don't I list it off for you? Yoda raised a brow, though he waited to hear Peter's opinion on the matter. They're elitist, uptight, rigid know-it-alls, each of them more stuck in their ways than the last. They misdefine attachment and emotions to a concerning degree, and even ban them as if suddenly emotions won't exist anymore just because they decreed it. And finally, they spend all of their time in their actual ivory towers, ignoring the galaxy's problems, unless of course, the Republic calls upon them for help. Both Yoda and Dooku were shocked, neither expecting Peter to go into such detail, hitting the nail right on the head with every word that left his mouth. Am I wrong? Peter asked, staring straight into Dooku's eyes. Yes. He replied, unwilling to admit defeat. The Jedi are an extension of the Republic, whether they like it or not. Defend them all you like, but as long as the Republic is corrupt, then so are the Jedi. Peter nodded. And I agree, but that sounds like it's a Senate problem, not a Jedi one. The Jedi merely follow orders and do their best to mediate the Senate's decisions. If you want to change the Republic and the Jedi, then you first have to start in the Senate. But you already know this, don't you? So why is it that you are so keen to tear down the Jedi? Was I right? Did your little green daddy not love you back? Instantly, the air crackled with tension, as Dooku's face momentarily twisted in a flash of pure rage, giving both Peter and Yoda a glimpse of the darkness within. It wasn't much, just a tiny slip from a novice Sith, but it was more than enough to raise suspicion. But before any more words could be exchanged, a sudden, ominous shadow drew their gaze upward. A huge bug-like ship emerged on the horizon, its approach swift and purposeful towards the Jedi Temple. Peter's eyes widened as he recognized the design, a Chitauri ship similar to the ones that attacked New York in the Avengers movie. Completely forgetting their little squabble, at least for the time being, the trio watched in disbelief as the ship's central plasma cannon activated, a bright light gathering energy at its core, aiming directly at them. Oh, *T. Peter thought as the cannon fired, sending a thick beam of red energy shooting towards the Jedi Temple's front gate, exactly where they stood. The moment the Chitauri ship unleashed its deadly payload, the air around the Jedi Temple tensed with the anticipation of destruction. But as the bright beam of plasma hurtled toward them, Peter, Yoda, and even Count Dooku found themselves united by a singular goal, the defense of themselves and the temple. With barely a second to spare, the trio simultaneously reached out with the Force, their powers intertwining and amplifying as they sought to counter the onslaught with a mighty telekinetic push. The air vibrated with the power of their combined wills, a testament to the strength of the Force when wielded in unison. As the beam neared, it met an invisible barrier created by their collective effort. Straining against the immense power, they managed to deflect the beam away from the temple, redirecting it towards the open square. The impact was monumental, the ground shaking violently as the beam exploded upon contact, leaving a gaping crater in its wake. Amid the settling dust, Yoda's expression was uncharacteristically severe, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a fierce determination. Without a word, he raised his hand toward the looming ship, his fist tightening, his intent clear. Peter, seeing Yoda's stance, instinctively joined him. Together, their power in the Force intertwined, focusing on dragging the alien craft down from the sky. The ship groaned and creaked, its descent inevitable under their combined might. Dooku, however, stood off to the side, observing but not assisting, his reasons known only to himself. With a final, concerted effort, the ship tilted, nose-diving toward the crater it had just created. The impact sent another shockwave through the area, shaking the temple once again, dust and debris clouding the air. As the dust began to settle, the temple's front doors swung open, and Nebula emerged, her face a mask of concern that quickly morphed into outright panic at the sight of the downed ship. Her worry deepened as three figures emerged from the wreckage, their outlines becoming clearer through the dissipating smoke. Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight stepped into view, their intentions unreadable but undoubtedly ominous. Nebula's heart raced, fear setting in as she knew why they had come here. "They're here for me." And just as she realized this, suddenly, a small, green figure came climbing out of the wreckage, taking her place beside Corvus and Proxima. "Hey, Nebula!" Chapter 36, C-36 Yoda's Power. In the aftermath of the ship's crash, the tension rolled in like a thick fog, as a silent standoff between the Jedi and the invaders ensued. Beside Grand Master Yoda, Peter stood rooted to the ground, his eyes widening at the spectacle unfolding before him. Two members of the Black Order, the Children of Thanos, an elite team comprised of powerful individuals who used their abilities to serve their adoptive father. Peter didn't even have time to register the childlike Gamera's arrival, his gaze locked onto the two powerhouses before him. But it didn't stop there. From the wreckage of the ship, following shortly behind the Mad Titan's children, a sea of humanoid, insect-like aliens, Chitauri soldiers, surged forward, brandishing their weapons. Insert picture of Chitauri here. Luckily, just as the Chitauri appeared, so did the Jedi. From the temple's entrance, a legion of white-robed guards emerged, forming up around Peter, Yoda, Nebula, and Dooku, their yellow lightsabers casting a bright glow, forming a stark contrast to the dark, monstrous creatures across from them. Watching this, Peter was starting to feel better about their chances, but will still have to deal with two members of the Black Order. He glanced over at Corvus and Proxima, apprehension and a small bit of fear beginning to well up in him. Glancing over at Yoda, Peter placed all of his hopes on his little master's shoulders, knowing this battle would be far harder than his encounter with Ronan, who can probably be considered a small fry in the eyes of the Black Order. In the midst of this escalating conflict, Nebula and Gamera shared a moment, their intense gazes interlocking amidst the chaos, a storm of emotions swirling between them. Gamera, ignoring the forming armies and the rising tension, stepped forward. "Nebula," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I thought I would never see you again." "Yeah, well, I hoped I'd never see you again, but we all can't get what we want," Nebula responded harshly. Gamera flinched. "Okay, I may have deserved that." "May have?" Nebula asked, her brow raised in question. "All right, I definitely deserved it," Gamera admitted, a sad frown marring her face. "Look, I'm really sorry about..." "Ugh." Nebula couldn't help but grunt, interrupting her sister, her voice slowly rising. "Why are you here? I just want to live my life in peace. Can't you just leave me alone?" "You know we can't do that," Gamera replied negatively. "Father ordered that we bring you back. We can't just leave without you. Just come back with us, and no one has to get hurt, I promise." Her plea was heartfelt, a stark contrast to the coldness that had defined their relationship for years. Glancing at her bloodthirsty companions, Gamera continued. You don't want your friends to die, do you? Let's just go home before this gets worse than it already is. Nebula, visibly torn, shot a suspicious glance at Gamera. Home? She scoffed. I'd rather die than go anywhere near that hellhole again. The anguish in her voice was evident, a result of years of hardship. It was then that Peter intervened, his voice steady and reassuring. Nebula, you don't have to go anywhere you don't want to. We'll protect you. He said as he turned to glance at Yoda. Isn't that right? Immediately, the little Grandmaster tapped his cane onto the stone floor. Protect you, the Jedi will, In response, the Jedi guards offered no words, but their actions spoke volumes. In a silent, yet clear agreement, they tightened their grip on their lightsabers, the force radiating off of them in waves. The hum of their blades filled the air, a resonant promise of protection. They stepped forward, a solid wall of resolve and courage, their alignment and readiness for battle clear in their steady stances and focused expressions. But despite Peter and the Jedi's assurance, Nebula's resolve wavered as she considered the potential consequences of her refusal. Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight, both formidable maniacs, stood ready to unleash death itself should she resist. The thought of such a thing happening to the Jedi weighed heavily on her, a burden she wasn't sure she was willing to bear. Just as Nebula was about to relent, and give herself up, Proxima's taunting voice grated her ears. Oh, dear Nebula, still as naive as ever, I see. Did you think Gamera just suddenly had a change of heart? Her cruel laughter echoed, drawing eyes towards her. Absolutely not. She's simply here to retrieve her punching bag. Ever since you vanished, I've assumed your role as her sparring partner. And I've savored every single moment. Proxima boasted, a twisted pride in her voice. Nebula's gaze shifted to Gamera, noticing now the way her sister's posture stiffened, the truth unmistakable in her eyes. A sudden realization struck her. The bruises and cuts adorning Gamera's body, initially assumed to be the result of the crash, told a different story upon closer inspection. They were healing, suggesting they weren't so recent. Nebula's heart sank as the pieces fell into place. Gamera, always the victor in their sparring matches, was now facing a new, more powerful opponent. And now, she wanted Nebula to return not out of sisterly love, as she seemed to portray, but out of a desire to escape Proxima's beatings. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Nebula's eyes hardened as she faced Gamera, her voice laced with newfound defiance. You don't care about me at all, do you? She asked, though it sounded more like an accusation. Gamera's eyes widened, the truth of Nebula's words hitting too close to home. She had indeed grown weary of being pitted against a stronger, more vicious opponent, and looked forward to facing Nebula again, but she also wanted her sister back. When Nebula disappeared, she began to realize how much she neglected their relationship. This realization brought a depth of regret and a yearning for redemption. Gamera understood now, more than ever, that the battles they fought against each other under their father's watchful eye had robbed them of the chance to truly be sisters. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about reclaiming what they had lost, a chance to build a genuine bond once again. No, I know it's hard to believe me, but it's really not like that, I swear. Gamera denied, but her sister didn't seem to believe her. Her eyes, once filled with defiance, now shimmered with an unspoken sorrow. Peter frowned as he sensed just how heartbroken both Gamera and Nebula seemed to be over this. If we survive this, I'll try to help them out somehow, he thought, feeling bad for the sisters. You're right, I don't believe you, Nebula admitted, her voice barely above a whisper as she made her decision, glancing back at Peter. But I can't let you kill all of them either. Peter stepped forward, his usual playful demeanor was shadowed by the gravity of the situation. Hey, Nebula, he began, his voice serious, yet comforting. We got this, okay? Don't do anything rash. We're tougher than we look, especially Yoda. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for us. Nebula paused, her stoic facade crumbling for a moment as she looked into Peter's eyes. Yes, I do, she smiled sadly, her voice laced with a mix of determination and anguish. She took a hesitant step toward Peter, as if to offer a final goodbye. But before any more words could be exchanged, Corvus Glaive's harsh laughter pierced the somber moment, his amusement chilling to the bone. Oh, how quaint, he mocked, his cruel gaze sweeping over the group. But let's not pretend this changes anything. You've made your choice, yes, but we never agreed to spare their lives. The blood drained from Nebula's face as Corvus's intent became clear. The hope that her sacrifice might spare her new friends was dashed in an instant. Gamera, standing across from her sister, turned to her older siblings. Can't we just take her and go? Our ship is already damaged enough as it is. We should leave before anyone else shows up. She argued. Corvus turned to Gamera, his expression one of mock surprise. My dear, since when do you decide what we do? You seem to forget your place. Father's orders were clear, and they didn't include sparing anyone here. The defiance in Gamera's eyes didn't waver, but the realization that she was powerless to change their fate was a bitter pill to swallow. Peter stepped in front of Nebula, his lightsaber igniting in his hand. I wasn't going to let you take her anyway, so this works out for me, he declared, his voice steady, though his heart raced with fear and anticipation. Master Yoda, silent up until now, nodded. Ready, the Jedi are. Protect the innocent, we must. Fight, we will. He said, stepping up beside Peter as his saber fell into his hand, igniting in an emerald light. The Jedi guards, sensing the imminent battle, repositioned themselves, their lightsabers ready. The air was charged with the force of their collective resolve, a stark contrast to the dark intentions of their adversaries. Peter took a deep breath, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Jedi. God, I hope I'm not overestimating just how strong Yoda is. He thought, his mind calming as he resigned himself for what was to come. Yet, no matter the odds, they would stand together, fighting for what was right. Across from them, Corvus and Proxima stood with predatory grace, their weapons gleaming in the light of the setting sun. Their gaze fixed on their opponents, their intent clear and lethal. The Chitauri soldiers, a seething mass of alien malice, readied themselves behind their formidable commanders, their numbers far outweighing the Jedi. The first move was almost imperceptible, a mere shifting of weight, but it set the cascade in motion. With weapons poised, both Corvus and Proxima leaped forward with lethal grace, their movements a blur as they aimed to strike at the heart of their opposition. Yet, what came next would forever be etched in the minds of those who bore witness to it. Master Yoda, the epitome of serenity amidst chaos, merely extended a hand, his fingers spread in a gesture of unyielding resolve. The air around them seemed to condense, a visible distortion rippling through the atmosphere as if reality itself bent to the will of the Force. And then, with a power that contradicted his small stature, Yoda unleashed a wave of telekinetic energy so potent, that it seemed as though the very essence of the Force had been harnessed and directed with a precision that was both breathtaking and terrifying. Corvus and Proxima, caught off guard, found themselves suddenly and violently repelled. It was as if they had been struck by an unseen meteor, an invisible force of such magnitude that it sent them hurtling backward with an explosive force. Boom! The sound of their bodies contorting and cracking filled the air as they launched backward, impacting the metal hull of their ship with a bang similar to clapping thunder. Amidst the sudden silence that followed, Peter stood, mouth agape, his eyes wide with disbelief as he watched them disappear into the wreckage of their vessel, leaving gaping holes in its hull. Recovering from his initial shock, Peter couldn't help but let out a low whistle, admiration and relief mingling in his voice. "God damn," he murmured. Beside him, Yoda smiled, his gaze turning to his shocked Padawan. "Impressed, you are, he asked, enjoying the dumb look on his student's face. Peter couldn't help but scoff as he replied, mimicking his master, "Smug, you are, Around them, the Jedi guards engaged the Chitauri, who became incensed by the sudden attack upon their commanders. The Jedi's yellow lightsabers sliced through the air, carving paths of light through the malevolent swarm descending upon them. Meanwhile, Nebula and Gamera collided with intense ferocity. Each strike, each block, was imbued with the weight of their shared past, a dance of pain and power. "You don't have to do this, Nebula," Gamera gritted out, her voice tight with emotion as she blocked a particularly vicious kick. Nebula's reply was a pained scowl, her eyes betraying the turmoil within. "Shut up. Stop pretending that you care," she said, just before launching at her sister. As the battle kicked off around them, Peter and Yoda's joking demeanor suddenly turned serious as their attention shifted to the crashed ship, watching as two very angry-looking figures came rushing out. C-371 down. The aftermath of Master Yoda's display of power hung in the air, a silent testament to the force wielded by a Jedi Grandmaster at his peak of power. Even now, Peter still could hardly believe what he'd just witnessed. I wonder how Yoda would fare against Thanos. However, the brief moment of wonder was shattered as Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight emerged from the wreckage of their ship, their eyes blazing with fury and vengeance. Corvus, his spear gleaming with a malevolent light, locked eyes with Yoda, a silent vow of retribution in his gaze. Proxima, sword in hand, turned her deadly intent towards Peter, the sharp edge of her weapon promising a swift end. "Why is she looking at me like that?" he asked aloud, jokingly gesturing to the little green alien beside him. "It was him that sent you two flying, not me. I don't even know this guy, we just met a few minutes ago." Count Dooku, a bystander who was thrown into this mess without a clue as to what was happening, scoffed at Peter's behavior. "Ah, the Jedi way I recall so fondly, quick to cast aside their own comrades. I see some traditions never die." Rolling his eyes, Peter quickly countered. "I'm sure you'd know all about casting your comrades aside," he retorted, his joking demeanor vanishing. With an air of thinly veiled disdain, Dooku turns to face Yoda, ignoring Peter once again. "I believe I'll leave this." He gestures to the chaotic battle ensuing around them, "mess in your capable hands." With a final, dismissive glance between Peter and his former mentor, Dooku turns on his heel and strides away, the very picture of indifference, unwilling to lift a finger in support of the Jedi Order. Peter watches him go, then looks back to Yoda, his expression a mixture of disdain and contempt. "So, that guy used to be your student too, huh?" he asked, a clear disapproval in his voice. "Where do you think you went wrong? Or was he always such a cowardly little **CK? Momentarily disturbed by the callous departure of his former student, Yoda focuses on the immediate threat. "Concern ourselves with my wayward pupil later, we will," he states, turning to face their adversaries with a calm resolve. "First, deal with them, we must." Peter nods, understanding that they didn't have much time for talk. "But you noticed it too, right?" he asks, nodding towards Dooku's retreating figure. Yoda glances at his retreating disciple, a frown marring his usually serene face as he recalled the sliver of rage he released. "Yes, worrying, it is. But first, deal with what's in front of us, we must." Before more could be said, Proxima, with a growl of impatience, launches herself forward, her blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. "Enough stalling!" she shouts, her voice ear-piercing. Corvus, not a heartbeat behind, follows with his spear, the tip glowing ominously. The abrupt aggression left no room for further discussion as both Peter and Yoda turned serious, tightly gripping their lightsabers as the force flowed through them, empowering their bodies. The ground seemed to tremble beneath Proxima and Corvus's feet as they charged forward, their speed and ferocity a blur to anyone watching. Peter readied himself, his lightsaber humming dangerously as Proxima appeared before him, her sword slicing downward. Ugh! But Peter was quick to block, his muscles straining as the ground beneath his feet cracked under the strength of her blow. The clash was thunderous, a symphony of sparks and power. Peter, despite his training and abilities, found himself struggling to keep up with Proxima's relentless assault. Her swordsmanship was impeccable, each strike a deadly dance that he barely managed to parry or dodge. Meanwhile, Yoda's duel with Corvus was the complete opposite. Despite the formidable strength and speed of his opponent, Yoda was relaxed and nonchalant, moving with an agility and precision that seemed to bend the very fabric of space around him. Corvus's attacks, though fierce and unyielding, were met with the calm, unshakable blade of the Jedi Grand Master. Until finally, Yoda went on the offensive, overwhelming his opponent with a barrage of strikes that sent him reeling backward. Meanwhile, Count Dooku's attempt to distance himself from the battle proved futile. The surrounding clash between the Jedi and the Chitauri, previously a mere backdrop to his departure, quickly became an obstacle as the alien soldiers, mistaking him for an ally of the Jedi, began to swarm in his direction. With a resigned, frustrated sigh, Dooku reached out and called upon one of the deceased Jedi guards' lightsabers, its blade igniting as soon as it fell into his hand, cutting sharply through anyone who stood in his way. The Chitauri, unprepared for the strength and skill of the former Jedi Master, found themselves outmatched. Dooku moved with a grace and efficiency that was terrifying in its precision, each sweep of his lightsaber slaughtering multiple adversaries. The Jedi nearby, witnessing this unexpected intervention, exchanged looks of confusion and disbelief. Dooku, known to them only as a traitor to their order, now fought alongside them, cutting down their adversaries with a deadly grace. And as Dooku made his way through the ranks of the Chitauri, his path inevitably led him further from the epicenter of the conflict. After all, he had no intention to help any more than this. As Dooku was forced to join the battle, the clash between Nebula and Gamera intensified. The sisters, devoid of any weapons, were left to rely on their raw physical prowess and ability, each movement a reflection of their inner turmoil. Gamera, her muscles tensing, launched herself at Nebula with a ferocious roar. Their strikes met with the sound of sickening cracks, each blow echoing the pain of years lost in battles fought not just against each other, but against the destiny forced upon them. Nebula. You know this is pointless. Gamera shouted as she dodged a ruthless jab. Why? Because you say so. Nebula spat back, her voice laced with scorn as she landed a vicious uppercut that sent Gamera staggering. You're no different from him. Their screams filled the void, seeped in rage and regret. With each exchange, the sisters unleashed a torrent of grievances, their words as sharp as any blade. You always were his favorite. Nebula accused, her voice breaking as she remembered the countless times she had been left in the shadow of Gamera's accomplishments. And you think I wanted that? Gamera retorted, her own pain surfacing with each word. I was just trying to survive, Nebula. Just like you. And why do you think I left? Nebula's voice quivered as she forced the words out, her fist colliding with Gamera's face. Every day with him, with all of you, it was killing me. You don't know what it's like to be hated, to feel like you're just something for him to break and rebuild as he pleases. Gamera spat out a mouthful of blood, her gaze meeting Nebula's. The defiance that had once flared in her eyes was now replaced by a dawning realization of the depth of her sister's suffering. Every victory you had, every moment you were the favorite, it cost me piece after piece of my flesh and blood. Nebula shouted, her mechanical fist striking her stunned sister's face yet again. He used me as a test subject. Every time I failed, every time I wasn't good enough, it was another enhancement, another piece of me replaced. And where were you? Nebula yelled, tears dripping down her face. Where were you while he tortured me? I called your name for hours. I begged for my sister over and over again, but where were you? The air hung heavy with Nebula's confession, her voice a mix of bitterness and longing. Gamera's eyes welled with tears, the gravity of Nebula's suffering breaking through the walls she had built around her heart. I'm so sorry, Nebula. Gamera apologized, her voice barely a whisper, heavy with the realization of her sister's pain and her role in it. Nebula, her breath shallow and ragged from the fight, paused for a moment, her gaze locked on Gamera's. The battlefield around them seemed to fade into silence, waiting for her response. The moment stretched, filled with the possibility of forgiveness, of a new beginning. But then, the air shifted, the weight of years of pain and betrayal pressing down once more. Nebula's expression hardened, the brief flicker of connection giving way to the cold, familiar wall of resentment. It's too late to be sorry, Gamera, Nebula said, her voice laced with a bitterness that cut through the brief silence. Her hand clenched into a fist, the tension in her body coiling like a spring. Before Gamera could react, Nebula's fist connected with her face once again, a physical manifestation of the hurt and anger that lay between them. The impact sent Gamera stumbling back, her face dripping blood as a cut opened up over her eye. The battle raged on, their bodies bruised and battered, a physical manifestation of the emotional scars they bore. The intensity of their fight brought them to the brink of exhaustion, each move slower, more labored than the last. Their once powerful strikes now barely had the strength to push the other back. As the final blows were exchanged, the air around them seemed to still, the only sound that of their heavy breathing and the soft thud of their fists. And then, as if by an unspoken agreement, their anger spent, their bodies gave way to the exhaustion and pain that had been building. In one last, simultaneous effort, Nebula and Gamera lunged at each other, only to collapse into a heap on the ground, unconscious, the weight of their grievances still lingering in the air. Back at the heart of the battle, Peter and Yoda found themselves locked in a dance of death with Corvus and Proxima. Each fight the complete opposite of the other, as Peter remained defensive, barely surviving each clash, while Yoda's every move seemed to overwhelm his opponent, making it look rather easy. Proxima's blade, swift and merciless, sought to find a chink in Peter's scrambling defenses. But, fueled by a combination of fear, adrenaline, and determination, he kept her at bay, his lightsaber moving in arcs that mirrored the desperation and hope that drove him. "Quit running, you little bug!" she shouted as she swung her sword, a manic smile on her face. Yoda, facing Corvus, was a whirlwind of motion. Despite the disparity in their sizes, the Jedi Master's agility and mastery of the Force rendered him a formidable adversary. Corvus's spear, usually deadly in its precision, was constantly moving to block Yoda's swift and continuous strikes. "Slowing, you are. Yoda commented, which only seemed to infuriate his opponent. And in a fluid motion, Yoda exploited a fleeting gap in Corvus's defense. With a swift arc of his lightsaber, he severed Corvus's hand, sending the spear clattering to the ground. Instantly, the battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat, the significance of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Locked in a clash with his opponent, Peter saw his chance. The spear, Corvus's weapon of choice, lay on the ground, its master disarmed and reeling from the loss. With Proxima's sole focus on him, Peter seized the moment. Tapping into his most powerful ability, Peter discreetly extended his hand towards the fallen spear. The spear rattled against the ground as if caught in an unseen grip before it shot through the air toward his target, guided by his will. Proxima, caught off guard by this unexpected maneuver, barely had time to register the danger. The spear, propelled by Peter's telekinetic pull, found its mark, impaling her from behind. Arg! The force of the impact drove the breath from her lungs, a look of shock and betrayal etching her features as she stumbled forward, her eyes wide with the realization of her impending death. Peter heaved a few breaths before holding up his middle fingers. FCKU. Heavy breaths you, ugly BTCH. As Proxima collapsed, blood pooling around her stiffening body, Corvus's eyes widened in alarm. Proxima. Chapter 38, C-38 Dying Threats. The once chaotic battlefield seemed to freeze for a moment as Corvus's gaze shifted to Proxima's fallen, bloodied form, his eyes widening as he caught sight of his own spear sticking out of her back. The silence was heavy, loaded with an impending storm of emotions as he rushed to her side, his every move showcasing the turmoil within. Peter, standing over the body, lightsaber still in hand, watched as the scene unfolded. The fight had drained him, sweat and dirt marking his features. Corvus knelt beside Proxima, his remaining hand reaching out to gently cup her face, an action so tender and loving, completely opposite to his initial malicious behavior. Proxima. His voice was a whisper, a mix of disbelief and anguish, as if speaking louder might confirm the irreversible truth of her death. At that moment, the depth of their relationship was laid bare, a connection forged not by blood but by choice, their loyalty to each other transcending the titles bestowed upon them by their father, Thanos. Though they called themselves Thanos's children, they were not, in fact, related in any way, shape, or form. Their bond was one of choice, a deep, intimate connection that transcended their allegiance to their warlord father. In other words, they were lovers. Their love story, twisted and tangled as it may have been, was filled with tender moments and carnal passion, yet it had come to a sudden and horrific end today. As Corvus's hands, so often used to inflict pain and suffering, now cradled Proxima's face with a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation, around them, the battle seemed to hold its breath, even the winds pausing in respect for the moment of grief. Proxima's eyes, once filled with the ferocity of a warrior, now stared emptily at the sky, her last expression one of shock and betrayal. Peter, with his resolve firm and adrenaline still surging, experienced a fleeting moment of discomfort. He had not initiated this conflict and bore no regrets for his actions. However, seeing Corvus's alien face twisted in grief was certainly unsettling. Upon witnessing this scene, Peter came to understand that even heinous, evil individuals, much like Thanos's devoted minions, are not devoid of personal relationships. There exist individuals in their lives, perhaps family or friends, who, despite everything, would feel the impact of their loss and mourn their absence. Thankfully, they're both pieces of trash, so I don't have to feel too bad. Peter concluded. Suddenly, the air around them tensed, a palpable shift in energy as Corvus's sorrow quickly turned to fury. His eyes, lifting from Proxima's still form, locked onto Peter with an intensity that promised retribution. The atmosphere crackled with his rage, the ground beneath him seeming to quake in anticipation of his vengeance. Peter, aware of the imminent danger, clenched his lightsaber, bracing for Corvus's advance. How about we end this before anyone else gets hurt? Just surrender, he suggested firmly, sending a quick look towards Yoda, subtly asking for backup, yet his posture showed he was prepared to stand his ground. Yet, Corvus didn't reply, his fury rising with every passing second. This was not just a battle between foes anymore. No, it was a deeply personal vendetta being born from the ashes of a fallen lover. Yoda, who had been watching from a distance, approached slowly, his expression somber. The Jedi Grand Master understood the cycle of violence that was unfolding, the pain of loss fueling the fires of anger and revenge. Corvus, consumed by his grief and rage, stared up, his eyes never leaving Peter. The air around him seemed to throb with his anger, an aura of menace emanating from his very being. His voice, when he finally spoke, was laced with a venomous promise, "You will pay for this, with everything you have." Peter, though weary, met Corvus's gaze with a defiant resilience. "Look, I'm sorry for your loss. I know what it's like to lose someone you love, but what did you think would happen when you came here trying to murder everyone?" he asked, but received no reply. Just a cold hard stare that promised pain and agony. Peter continued, making his point clear, "If you go around trying to kill people, you should expect the same treatment in return," he said, his voice carrying nothing but a cold, logical realism. "Or as the Jedi would say, the energy we emit into the Force is the same energy that returns to us, a reflection of our actions and intentions." Yoda absorbed his Padawan's words, feeling a surge of pride well up inside him. After all, in situations like these, it's all too easy to remain indifferent and hostile to your enemy, yet Peter resisted the temptation and even sympathized with Corvus. But sadly, his words didn't seem to help ease the situation. The tension only seemed to grow, as Corvus, driven by a maelstrom of pain, fury and vengeance, rose to his feet, his every move watched by allies and adversaries alike. A sickening squelch filled the air as Corvus used his remaining hand to gently pull his spear from Proxima's back. His grief-stricken eyes, now hollow with the promise of retribution, found Peter with lethal intent. Without another word, he lunged forward, the spear aimed directly at Peter's heart, its blade still glistening with the blood of his deceased lover. But before the weapon could find its mark, a green figure emerged between them with astonishing speed. Yoda, his emerald lightsaber humming to life, deflected the spear with a swift, precise movement. Peter, seizing the opportunity Yoda's intervention provided, quickly joined the fray, positioning himself to flank Corvus and add his own lightsaber to the mix, pressing their numerical advantage with coordinated attacks. For a moment, Corvus was caught between the two, his spear moving in rapid arcs to fend off Peter's precise jabs and Yoda's unpredictable onslaught. However, Corvus, fueled by his rage and sorrow, pushed himself to the very limit. With a powerful shove of his spear, he pushed Yoda back, creating just enough space to pivot toward Peter, the target of his burning vengeance. Corvus's spear, now aimed with deadly precision, sliced through the air towards Peter's heart. "Die. Nah, I'm good," Peter replied, and with a deft move, he parried to the left, the clash of metal and energy sparking in the night. "I like my life, so I'll have to pass." But Corvus was relentless, spinning swiftly to bring his spear in a wide arc aimed at Peter's head. Peter ducked, feeling the whoosh of air as the weapon missed by mere inches, trimming his hair in the process. Seizing the moment, Peter countered with a swift upward slash aimed at his opponent's midsection. Corvus, anticipating the move, stepped back, narrowly avoiding the blade. But as he did, Yoda appeared beside him like a wraith, his lightsaber slicing through the air towards Corvus's arm. Corvus, reacting with surprising speed, managed to twist away from Yoda's attack, but not completely. Yoda's blade grazed his arm, leaving a searing line of pain in its wake. Arg! With a roar of frustration, Corvus swung his spear towards Yoda, intending to take the Jedi Master down with a single, powerful blow. But Yoda was no easy target. He leaped high into the air, somersaulting over the spear and landing gracefully behind Corvus. And before Corvus could turn to face him, Peter was on him again, lightsaber swinging in a precise, horizontal slash aimed at Corvus's knees. Corvus leaped backward, evading Peter's strike, but this movement put him directly in Yoda's path once again. With surprising speed for his age, Yoda launched himself at Corvus, his lightsaber aimed at the grieving lover's exposed side. Corvus barely raised his spear in time to block, the impact sending shockwaves through his arm. The battle raged on, each combatant locked in a deadly ballet of strike and counter-strike. Corvus fought with the desperation of a cornered, wild beast, his spear a deadly extension of his will. But against Peter's cunning and Yoda's mastery of the Force, he found himself increasingly on the defensive. Peter, sensing an opening, feinted a strike toward Corvus's head, prompting a hasty, upward block. But the move was a ruse, allowing Yoda to close in unnoticed. With a fluid motion, Yoda's lightsaber found its mark, slicing cleanly through Corvus's defenses and severing his arm at the shoulder. Corvus's scream of agony was cut short as Peter, now in perfect sync with Yoda, delivered a decisive strike, his lightsaber severing his other arm, causing Corvus to drop his weapon, completely unarmed, both literally and figuratively. As Corvus collapsed to his knees, disarmed and defeated, his gaze turned to Proxima's unmoving figure. He knew he would soon follow after her, feeling an odd sense of peace as Peter and Yoda appeared beside him, lightsabers at the ready. Together, they plunged their blades into his chest, the extreme heat cooking his body from the inside out. The battlefield, once chaotic with the clash of wills and weapons, fell into a heavy silence, punctuated only by Corvus's labored, final breaths. As the lightsabers pierced him, Corvus's face twisted not in pain, but in a grotesque smile. With the last of his strength, he laughed in their faces, a sound both chilling and ominous. "The Mad Titan will avenge us," he gasped, blood frothing at his lips. "Your world will burn," he foretold. His only regret was that he wouldn't be there to watch it happen. With those final words, the light faded from Corvus Glaive's eyes, his body going limp as it slumped to the ground. And simultaneously, the Jedi guards finished off the last of the Chitauri, bringing the chaotic battlefield into a state of peace. Peter and Yoda deactivated their lightsabers, the weight of Corvus's dying prophecy hanging heavy in the air. They exchanged a glance, a silent, foreboding feeling shared between them. "Maybe I should leave the Jedi earlier than I initially planned," Peter thought, ready to escape within the hour if it meant avoiding Thanos' wrath. Chapter 39, C-39 Leave or Stay. In the aftermath of the fierce battle on Coruscant, the once vibrant air was thick with the scent of charred metal, blood, and the undercurrent of both victory and loss. The Jedi Temple, a beacon of peace and justice, had been the unexpected stage for a confrontation that would leave its mark on the galaxy's history. Peter stood amidst the ruins, his gaze sweeping over the scene with a weary diligence. As the cleanup began, the city's police force arrived, far too late to assist in the battle, but not too late to help with the cleanup. With precision and a somber dedication, they navigated the battlefield alongside the Jedi, documenting evidence and gathering the fallen. Their questions were methodical, aimed at piecing together the events that led to the attack. Though Peter and Yoda offered their accounts, the details seemed almost unbelievable, especially as they explained the fact that this was all over a runaway 12-year-old girl. After all, what type of maniac would send a homicidal army off to the capital of the Galactic Republic just to retrieve a runaway child? Apparently, Thanos would. Peter thought as he carted both Nebula and Gamera's unconscious bodies to the Jedi Temple's infirmary for medical attention. Of course, the news of the attack reached the Senate with alarming speed, sending ripples of concern and outrage through its members. An emergency session was called, voices raised not just in grief for the loss of life but in fear of an unknown enemy powerful and brazen enough to strike at the heart of the Jedi Order. The few Jedi guards who had fallen in defense of the temple were honored, their names added to the long list of heroes who had given their lives in the service of a peaceful republic. But it was the holonet that carried the news beyond the polished halls of the Senate and into the homes of citizens galaxy-wide. Footage of the battle, captured by surveillance drones and bystanders, circulated with viral intensity. Each clip, each image, served as a reminder of how dangerous the galaxy could be, even in the heart of the Republic. The attackers, still largely unidentified, became the subject of widespread speculation and fear. No one knew why they had attacked or what their endgame might be, but most wrote it off as some sort of vendetta against the Jedi. Speaking of the Jedi, as the footage of the battle flooded the holonet, an unexpected shift began to take root among the galaxy's populace. Before the attack, public opinion of the Jedi had been waning, significantly influenced by Count Dooku's eloquent speech that painted the Order in a questionable light. His words, persuasive and filled with conviction, had sown seeds of doubt and mistrust, challenging the Jedi's role and authority within the Republic. However, the video of the Jedi fighting off gruesome-looking invaders Peter and Yoda, in particular standing valiantly against two rather frightening foes, began to counteract the Count's narrative. Citizens watched as lightsabers clashed against the advanced weaponry of their assailants, the Jedi moving with grace and power, protecting the temple as well as the planet. The footage highlighted their bravery, their sacrifice, and their unwavering resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. In the aftermath, as discussions filled the comment sections, chat rooms, and forums of the holonet, a notable shift in public sentiment emerged. Where once there had been skepticism and uncertainty, there was now a growing respect and admiration for the Jedi. People began to question the validity of Dooku's claims, comparing his words against the actions of the Jedi they witnessed on screen. The stark contrast between the narratives began to unravel the Count's carefully constructed image of the Jedi. The public's approval of the Jedi, bolstered by the visual proof of their heroism and dedication, saw a significant resurgence. Stories of individual acts of bravery throughout the years had begun to surface. Suddenly, everyone who's ever met a Jedi began to share their encounters. Tales of heroism, of healers tending to the sick and wounded, and of the Order's efforts to keep the peace in and out of the Republic became common across the holonet. These stories, shared from person to person, planet to planet, served as a powerful counter-narrative to Dooku's accusations. Of course, some people had either unsavory intentions or unfortunate interactions with the Jedi, as a small fraction of stories weren't as heartwarming and uplifting as the rest, though the good seemed to far outweigh the bad. This resurgence of approval did not erase all doubts or heal all wounds, but it marked a crucial turning point. The Jedi's actions on that fateful day on Coruscant became a beacon of hope for many, a reminder of the ideals and values that had long been associated with the Order. In the battle's aftermath, as the galaxy sought to make sense of the violence and fear, the image of the Jedi as protectors of peace and justice was, for many, restored. This renewed faith in the Jedi Order provided a much-needed foundation for unity and resilience in the uncertain times that seemed to lay ahead. As Coruscant and the Republic grappled with the aftermath, Peter found himself at a crossroads. Should I stay or should go? Sat in the waiting room outside the infirmary, where both Nebula and Gamera were being treated, Peter's mind raced back and forth. I need to make a decision, he silently urged himself, a habit he picked up whenever the weight of decision felt too heavy on his shoulders. The question of staying with the Jedi or becoming a stowaway on the next ship off of Coruscant had been haunting him since the dust settled on the battlefield. I could pack my things and be gone before the sun rises. The thought was tempting, an easy out that appealed to the part of him that had spent years trapped in this very temple. But as he mulled it over, another voice, deeper and more steadfast, began to counter his instinct to flee. But can I really just leave everyone behind? Ayla, Yoda, Ravan, Yondu. Peter had always been a loner in both lives, skillfully avoiding connections with anyone outside of his family. Yet, as he stood in the Jedi Temple, surrounded by people he cared for and who cared for him in return, fleeing seemed less like an option and more like deserting his loved ones to die alone. Thanos, the name alone was enough to send a shiver down his spine. The Mad Titan's wrath was legendary, and with Nebula and Gamera here and Proxima and Corvus's deaths, retribution seemed more and more likely. But then, his thoughts drifted to Yoda. The Jedi Grand Master had shown a strength and ability that went beyond anything Peter had ever expected from him. Maybe Yoda and the rest of the Jedi could stand a chance. Peter thought, especially if Thanos doesn't have the Infinity Stones. Wait. Are the Infinity Stones a thing in this universe? He wondered, seeing it as a 50-50 chance as this is two separate universes smashed together. The odds weren't amazing, but they weren't zero either. And even if he does come, and we lose, I can still prepare an emergency escape plan. One that includes the people I care about as well. Soon enough, Peter's resolve solidified. Running might keep me safe for a while, but it won't keep them safe. Thanos may come, but he might not as well. But if he does, he'll find us ready. And if there's even a sliver of a chance, then it's worth the risk. With a deep breath, Peter's decision was made. He wasn't going to run, he was going to stand with the Jedi, with Yoda, Ayla, and Yondu, and face the Mad Titan, should he actually come knocking. It wasn't just the hope that Thanos might not come that anchored him, but the realization that he had come to see the Jedi Temple as his home. In the heart of uncertainty, Peter found a place and people worth fighting for, and he wasn't willing to give them up so easily. Together, we've at least got a fighting chance. And hey, who knows? Maybe Thanos won't come. Peter mused, knowing full well these thoughts were just wishful thinking on his part. As Peter made up his mind, suddenly, the doors swung open, and in walked Yoda, a tired look on his aged face. After all, he's been busy since the battle came to a close. Taking a seat beside Peter, Yoda, looking weary yet composed, finally broke the silence. How fare Nebula and her sister, Peter shrugged, a gesture of concern mixed with hope. Docs say they'll be fine, bruises, cuts, and maybe a concussion each from duking it out. I'm just here to make sure nothing else pops up. He said, turning to Yoda, how has the cleanup been going? Messy, it is. Tired, I am. Yoda answered, his expression turning pensive. After a moment, he asked, what you said to Dooku outside the temple, before the attack. Truly feel that way about the Jedi, do you? Peter recalled his earlier words, they're elitist, uptight, rigid know-it-alls, each of them more stuck in their ways than the last. They misdefine attachment and emotions to a concerning degree, and even ban them as if suddenly emotions won't exist anymore just because they decreed it. And finally, they spend all of their time in their actual ivory towers, ignoring the galaxy's problems, unless of course, the Republic calls upon them for help. Peter met Yoda's gaze, noting the sadness there. He took a deep breath. Yeah, I do. I mean, sometimes, it just feels like we're so far removed from the normal, everyday people. Like, with the whole ban on emotions and attachments, it's like pretending a part of being alive doesn't exist. And staying holed up in this temple, it keeps us out of touch with the rest of the galaxy. Yoda's frown deepened, a weight of centuries in his eyes. But before he could respond, Peter quickly added, "But, that's not the whole picture. I've seen firsthand the good that the Jedi can and has done. Like today, and with all those stories going around. The Jedi heal, protect, and stand up for peace. That's noble. And it makes a real difference." The room brightened as a smile cracked Yoda's solemn demeanor. "See the flaws, you do, but also the good. Important, that is." Peter leaned back into his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. "Exactly. No one's perfect, right? But it's about trying to be better. That's what counts. The Jedi do so much good, and yet, there are issues, but which multilevel organization doesn't have them? What matters is confronting those issues and overcoming them, which the Jedi seem to have a problem doing," he admitted, giving Yoda one last bit of criticism. Yoda nodded, his eyes twinkling with a newfound energy. "Wise, you are, Peter. Remind me, you do, that always room for improvement, there is. And forget, we must not, the difference we make." Their conversation veered into the night, and as they talked, Peter couldn't help but feel a deep connection to this little master of his. Despite his power and wisdom, Yoda wasn't stuck in his ways like most Jedi. No, he appreciated the perspective of a Padawan like Peter, which ignited a newfound hope for the future of the Jedi Order with Yoda at its helm. As their discussion came to a close and Yoda departed to attend to additional tasks before retiring for the night, Peter rose from his seat to check on Nebula and Gamera. And just as he took a step toward the infirmary door, suddenly, it burst open. A disoriented and perplexed Gamera dashed out, pursued closely by a Jedi doctor, her eyes widening as she bumped into Peter. C-40 Gamera's failed escape. The corridors of the Jedi Temple Infirmary hummed with the soft, persistent sounds of medical droids and the gentle murmur of healers at work. It was here, amidst the clinical serenity, that Gamera's consciousness began to claw its way back, her senses gradually tuning into the world around her. Her eyes flickered open, adjusting slowly to the dim light. The room felt sterile and peaceful, a far cry from the atmosphere back home. "Where am I?" she wondered as her memory of her fight with Nebula began to slowly surface. But before she could think too much, suddenly, voices, muffled and indistinct, filtered through the air, the words slowly becoming clearer as she regained her bearings. "I just don't see how the Council can overlook this. She was fighting alongside those things that attacked the temple," one voice argued, his tone laced with a mix of frustration and disbelief. Sitting up in her hospital bed, Gamera caught sight of a few silhouettes, standing outside the curtain that separated her space from the rest of the infirmary, seemingly talking about her. Another voice, softer and more contemplative, countered, "But she's barely more than a child, isn't she? Fear and manipulation can drive even the best of us to unthinkable actions. Who knows what she's been through?" A third chimed in, a hint of weariness in their tone, "Locking her up won't solve anything. It's clear she needs guidance, not imprisonment. Still, it's not our place to decide. The Council will have to deliberate on this and determine her fate." The conversation ebbed and flowed, a tide of opinions that washed over Gamera, each word tightening the knot of panic in her stomach. "Lock me up. Determine my fate." The thoughts raced through her mind, a frantic pulse urging her to action. Without a second thought, Gamera swung her legs over the side of the bed, her movements swift and quiet. She could feel the weight of their gazes as she pushed past the curtain and ran off, but she didn't dare look back. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a deafening drum of escape. As she made her move, sprinting towards the door, a chorus of voices erupted behind her. "Wait! Stop!" But she didn't heed their calls. The only thought that fueled her was the need to escape, to evade the invisible chains they sought to bind her with. The automatic doors slid open just in time, and she burst through at full speed, but she didn't get far. Because just as she took a few steps out of the infirmary, suddenly, the world tilted. A figure loomed before her, too close to avoid. She collided with it, a solid, unyielding presence, and the impact sent her tumbling to the ground. Above her stood Peter Quill, the boy who was with her sister when she first arrived, his expression a canvas of confusion and concern. He looked down at her, the chaos of the moment reflected in his eyes. Gamera! Gamera's instincts screamed at her to flee, her chest heaved as she scrambled to her feet, her gaze darting between Peter and the Jedi doctors closing in from behind. She was trapped, and in that instant, desperation morphed into determination. She wouldn't go down without a fight. Why are you running? Peter's voice was calm, an attempt to diffuse the tension, but it was too late. Gamera's mind was made up. Without warning, she lunged at Peter, her fists clenched. Her training took over, each movement precise and aimed to kill if need be. But Peter, seemingly anticipating her every move, sidestepped with an ease and swiftness that contradicted his previous nonchalance. His connection to the Force allowed him a glimpse into her intentions, turning what would have been a fierce assault into a futile endeavor. Gamera, undeterred, aimed a swift kick at Peter's midsection, but with a calm look on his face, he caught her leg in midair, his reaction time and strength enhanced to a level far above hers. With a gentle push, he redirected her momentum, sending her stumbling backward. Look, why don't you just take a breath and calm down, okay? He continued to try and defuse the situation. Yet, Gamera couldn't be reasoned with, her mind that of a cornered animal as she recovered quickly, spinning around to deliver a roundhouse kick aimed at Peter's head. But Peter was already a step ahead, ducking under the kick and reaching out to poke her stomach, nudging Gamera's balance off kilter. He then reached out, not to strike, but to restrain. His use of the Force was gentle, yet firm, wrapping around her wrists like ethereal shackles, halting her movements. At this point, Gamera's frustration was already at its peak. She attempted to break free, her body twisting and turning in an effort to escape Peter's grasp, but it was in vain. After all, he's practically a prodigy when it comes to Force telekinesis. With her restrained in place, Peter walked closer, an eyebrow raised in a mix of challenge and curiosity. "Are you done now?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. Gamera, catching her breath, managed to compose herself. She straightened, meeting Peter's gaze. "Yeah, I'm calm," she replied, her tone suggesting surrender, but suddenly her eyes flashed with the last ember of defiance. It was that ember which sparked her next action. Just as Peter began to let his guard down, believing the confrontation was over, Gamera launched herself forward. In a final, desperate attempt at escape, she tried to headbutt Peter, hoping to catch him off guard. The momentary silence within the infirmary was abruptly broken by a resounding crack, as Gamera's forehead collided forcefully with Peter's face. The unexpected attack surprised him, his reaction a blend of shock and instinctual defense. In the immediate aftermath of the impact, his control over the Force wavered, leading to an inadvertent surge in the telekinetic energy he was employing to restrain Gamera. This overwhelming force sent her crashing backward with such intensity that upon hitting the ground, the breath was violently expelled from her lungs, leaving her sprawled and struggling for air. Peter, meanwhile, was left clutching his face, his eyes, wide with surprise and pain, met Gamera's defiant glare, both combatants caught in a moment of unexpected violence. Was that really necessary? Peter managed to grunt out, the ache in his face distorting his usual tone into a pained growl. Gamera, still sprawled on the floor, offered no apology, only matching his glare with a fierce one of her own. Yet, the arrival of the Jedi doctors, with their mix of concern and authority, made her realize the futility of further resistance. A resigned look crossed her face as she lay there, catching her breath, her earlier desperation now morphed into defeat. One of the doctors, more concerned for Peter's well-being, approached him quickly to assess the damage. "Are you all right?" the doctor asked, ready to assist. Peter, still holding his face, nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, a muffled response as he began to channel the Force into his healing. The bruises and swelling began to fade, leaving no trace of the injury, a process that left Gamera in awe. "How did you do that?" Gamera asked, her voice a mix of surprise and curiosity. "With the Force," Peter replied with a cryptic smile, the simplicity of his answer doing nothing to clarify the depth of his abilities to Gamera, whose knowledge of the Jedi and their powers was minimal at best. As the medical team made moves to restrain Gamera, so that they could bring her back into the infirmary, Peter intervened. "No need for that," he assured them. "She's just scared. I'll make sure she doesn't do anything rash again. Besides, she isn't a prisoner, at least not yet." The doctors exchanged looks, their skepticism evident, but they ultimately conceded, leaving Peter and Gamera alone with a reminder that Gamera needed a thorough check-up in the morning. Once the healers had departed, leaving an uneasy peace in their wake, Gamera turned to Peter, her expression shifting to one of concern. "Where's my sister?" she asked, the worry for Nebula cutting through the tension of their recent conflict. Peter gestured toward the back of the infirmary. "She's being treated over there," he said, indicating a secluded area where Nebula lay, still unconscious but under the careful watch of the Jedi healers. "She's fine, they ran all sorts of tests on both of you to be sure." Gamera, moved by a surge of mixed emotions, walked past Peter towards her sister, her footsteps hesitant yet determined. As she approached Nebula's bedside, she paused, taking in the sight of her sister, peaceful in her slumber. The sight softened her heart, filling it with sadness and regret over their last encounter, which had been anything but peaceful, nor was it the only encounter she regretted. As Gamera stared at her sister, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, Peter felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. The quiet hum of the Jedi Temple's infirmary blended into the background as he mulled over the dire necessity of bringing Thanos' looming threat to the Council's attention. The urgency of the situation pressed against his chest like a physical force. Peter stepped closer to Gamera, clearing his throat slightly to draw her attention away from Nebula. Hey, I'm Peter, by the way," he began, his voice soft yet carrying a seriousness that matched the gravity of their situation. "Do you mind answering a few questions?" "What? Why?" she asked, clearly still on guard. "Because I asked nicely," Peter replied, receiving a skeptical look in return. After a moment of silence between them, ultimately, Gamera relented. "Fine, what do you want to know? Can you tell me who or what the Mad Titan is?" Peter jumped straight to the heart of the matter. Of course, he already knew all about Thanos, but he couldn't just bring it up to the Jedi without proof. Thankfully, he now had Nebula and Gamera for that. Gamera's gaze snapped to Peter, her eyebrows knitting together in a mixture of confusion and concern. "The Mad Titan?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you hear that name?" "The guy you were with, before he died, he mentioned that the Mad Titan would avenge him and burn our planet," Peter explained, watching her reactions closely. "Who's the Mad Titan?" A flicker of surprise crossed Gamera's face, quickly replaced by a shadow of dread. "You killed Corvus? How? And what about Proxima?" Her voice was a mix of disbelief and concern. Peter nodded, a grim expression settling over his features. "Everyone who came with you is dead, including all of those bug soldiers." The revelation seemed to strike Gamera like a physical blow. She absorbed the news, her expression shifting from shock to realization as the full weight of her situation dawned on her. Alone, surrounded by those she had fought against, she was utterly vulnerable. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface now edged itself openly on her face. Seeing her distress, Peter placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Look, the Jedi won't harm a child, Gamera. You have nothing to worry about. Grandmaster Yoda would never allow it. Although we killed your friends, the Jedi are about as peaceful as it gets in this galaxy." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for sincerity. Finding it, her shoulders slumped slightly, though the tension didn't entirely leave her posture. "They aren't my friends," she mutters, making her disdain for Corvus and Proxima clear. "I see, then that makes this a little bit easier," Peter continued, his tone earnest. "I need your help. Can you tell us everything you know about all this? We need to be prepared if the planet and its people are at risk. And if you're willing to speak in front of the Jedi Council, that would be even better. They might even forgive your involvement in what happened as well." Gamera was silent for a long moment, her thoughts racing. Finally, she nodded, a small sign of trust in Peter and the possibility of leniency from the Council. "I'll explain everything," she said, her voice stronger now, resolute. And explain she did.
Thanks for listening.